Hello YouTube, this is me, Audiobook is Alive. I'd like to thank you guys for supporting me and liking and subbing to my channel. Now, check out my Patreon. For $7 you have access to all my novels. Yes, my novels, your 9 ones, you name it. Everything. Now then, you guys probably seen I'm doing premieres. Is that good for you guys or no? Do leave that in the comments in the video so I know if I should do more premieres or not. Now, I'm pretty sure you guys see me post on my new Discord channel. Do join my Discord channel so I can, because I have some new ideas for some new channel ideas. So do go there, and also you can request novels there for anything you like. Also, do leave a like and support. Now back to the video. Have a good day.
After some consideration, I decided I would craft the new boss with a scythe. I mean, it fit the backstory for him. I brought out my notebook and quickly sketched out what I had in mind. It had a shaft that was roughly 2 meters long and had ornate patterns that were etched into the metal. In the end, it wasn't anything too special, but for now, it would do. Once I had a general idea crafted out, I spawned it in the field next to him and let him go about his day. A yawn split my lips as I pushed myself away from my desk and stretched out a bit. I relished the feeling of my muscles stretching out as I tried to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my day. I didn't really want to train right now, and Nyx was hogging my bed, wallowing in her sadness. A part of me wanted to go in there and cuddle with her, but I should let her work through it on her own terms. Perhaps I could go for a walk. It would do me wonders, and it would give me a chance to explore my office space. Outside of my changes, I know that the Praetorians have been busy expanding this place. It's a good thing that the magic here keeps the walls from collapsing. Otherwise, they may have a long time ago. I walked to my office door and peeked into the lobby. In the middle sat a small fountain constantly spewing water out of the top, and a single battle mage sat at one of the benches. Their cloak shrouded their appearance, so I wasn't sure who or what they were. I felt I should make it a point to learn their names if they have one, but it was tough to communicate with them. Do you know when Alessia will be back? I stepped out of my office and closed the door behind me gently to hopefully not wake my daughter before I spun around to hear the mage's response. Sadly, the mage only shook his head, and my mood fell slightly. Oh, okay. I appreciate it. I sighed as I walked through the lobby. I was really missing her, but I was doing my best to not let it get to me. She was married to her work, and I fully understood that. When I was a line cook, I was the same way, grinding close to 70 hours a week. So I would never hold that against her. But I still missed her. I followed the red velvet carpet down the length of the lobby and glanced around. Next to my office door was a desk with a single undead that sat there, much like a secretary, but without all the phones ringing. I didn't need one, but Alessia insisted I make one, so I did. Whatever made her happy is all that mattered to me. I pushed through the lobby and switched my mental gears to my Praetorians. Originally, I designed them to be my bodyguards, but they became more akin to my personal legion, with the Palatines becoming my guards. In the end, that didn't bother me all that much, but I need to update them. Currently, I have hoplites to act as the defensive arm, a vanguard, mages, and assassins, but I have gaps that need to be filled. I know that I will need cavalry in the future, not to mention that I want to create a ranged division that doesn't have just mages, but includes archers and what other ranged units I could get my hands on. I do also want to create an engineering corps as well. At that point, I think I will have a pretty decent combination of troops at my disposal, and it would stop me from tampering with my legions more than I already do. Plus, it gives Octavian free reign, so it works out. I made a mental note to let Alessia know what I had in mind when I saw her next as I wandered out of the lobby and down the connecting hallway. 2 hoplites stood guard by the door with their massive shields resting on the ground and the butt of the spear resting on the ground at the position of attention. Hello, gentlemen, I called out as I glided past them. They both gave me a curt nod, and I smiled back as I pressed on. I wonder how Ajax is doing. I haven't seen him in a while, though to my knowledge, he was still active and training. The last I checked, he was still in charge of defense and fortifications. But I wasn't really all that close to him. I shrugged the thought away as I turned the corner and bumped into something. Empress. A feminine voice reached my ears as I staggered back a few steps. Not out of surprise, but just to make sure whoever I bumped into was okay. I glanced up and froze for a moment as my eyes landed on Alessia's face. For a few seconds, I stared as my mind tried to process what I saw for a moment. Confusion quickly morphed into shock, which melted into elation. Alessia! I almost shouted as I rushed over to her and threw my arms around her. My heart was racing in my chest as I laced my arms around her back and nestled myself into her chest. Needy, are we? Her tone took a teasing edge as her arms made their way around me, pulling her into me. What's a girl to do when I'm left all alone? I closed my eyes and stood there. The loneliness I felt quickly faded as it was replaced with sheer happiness. I missed you, Empress. Her hands clenched my cloak, and I felt my heart flutter in my chest. I missed you too, Alessia. So much. I really missed her. She has been a staple in my life for so long that it was getting harder to see it without her in it. With each passing day, I needed her more, and I was perfectly okay with that. We stood there for quite some time before I pushed away first. Alessia, come with me. I'm going for a walk. I reached out and took her hand in mine, interlacing our fingers as I tugged on her. As you wish. She gave me a beautiful smile as we walked hand in hand down the hallway. Usually, I would be against doing something like this, but at this moment, I didn't care. I was just happy that I had her back. How did your training go? I cast her a glance and drank in her features. Her flesh looked softer than before and more human-like. Her hair had darkened slightly and looked like rays of moonlight in a clear night sky. Her golden eyes beamed slightly as she thought it over for a moment. It went as well as I could have hoped. I brought 4 new palatines online, which brings us up to 6. I want more, but that won't happen for quite some time. I tightened my grip on her hand and marveled at how solid she was. She felt almost human. I'm glad that it went well, but I'm in no rush for more right now. 6 is plenty for the time being. I mostly said that since I didn't want her to leave again for quite some time. I wanted to be greedy and keep her here with me for a while longer. As you wish, Empress. Her eyes glimmered slightly, and it felt like her body was humming. Hearing her call me Empress bothered me slightly, but I was also in a really good mood and wanted her affection. I stopped in the middle of the hallway and glanced around to ensure no one was in sight. Alessia, darling. I spun on her and pressed my hands into her abdomen. Shockingly, I could feel abs under my palms, which alone sent a small spark of desire off my chest. She froze up slightly, and her eyes went wide as she stepped back, but I followed her backward. Yes, Empress. She stammered slightly as I pushed her back into the wall and leaned slightly over her. I left one hand on her stomach and the other, I placed it by her head. Alessia, call me by my name when we are by ourselves. Her eyes darted to my arm before they went back to my face. But, no buts. I saw something flicker in her eyes, and I knew what it was in a heartbeat. It was an act of submission, and it set a fire off deep within me. But it was hard to describe. Usually, I'm not a greedy person, but at that moment, I wanted to take her all for myself. I slowly trailed my hand up from her abdomen and fought the desire to strip her. Slowly, it traveled up and over her breast, and it took every ounce of willpower that I had to not grope her. Eventually, my hand came to rest under her chin, and I pressed my nail in to tilt her head up to me since it felt like she was shrinking under me. Alessia, I'm telling you to say my name. My voice dropped an octave as I gently pressed harder into her. I don't know what came over me at this moment, but I wouldn't argue with it. It felt so hot to stand here and do this. She stared into my eyes, and I could see dozens of emotions flicker past before she broke the silence. Of course, Calixa. When my name left her lips, I melted slightly, and I leaned in and pressed my lips against hers as hard as I could. Thousands of sparks danced across my flesh as she met mine in a frenzy. It all felt so right. She belonged to me, and I wasn't going to let her go. Alessia POV. Her lips mashed against my own, and I felt myself melting under her touch. I was shocked when I saw that she had changed in the week that I had left. She was far more beautiful now. Not that she wasn't before, but now she was otherworldly. It was surreal how I could feel her hands against me as clear as day, and I was on the cusp of losing my mind because of it. The fire that was raging in her eyes when she pinned me into the wall sparked feelings that had long since laid dominant. Alessia. She purred in my ear, and I felt my mind fry once more at the onslaught of pleasure that was budding in my chest. Why was she the only one that could make me feel so alive? Yes, Empress. I replied as I closed my eyes to avoid her gaze. I knew it bothered her, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted her to say something to me. No, I needed her to. The finger under my chin pressed into me harder, and her voice reached my ear with no small threat in it. Alessia, what did I just tell you? I opened my eyes and stared into her fiery eyes. A strange emotion flickered in my chest like a perverse heartbeat as I stared into her and lost myself in her eyes. I'm sorry, Calixa. Her name rolled from my tongue, and if I could breathe at that moment, I may have just whimpered. A feral grin crossed her face for a split second before she leaned back and wrapped her arms around me, holding me close to her. Can you call me that in private from now on, please? The tone in her voice became softer, and a part of me was sad that what we were doing was over. But I wasn't going to push her. I yearned for her, but her wish was my command at the end of the day. Of course, I replied as I pulled her into me and rested against the wall. I missed her so much. There wasn't a day that she wasn't on my mind. She was mine, just as much as I was hers. That was, without a doubt. Whether that was because of the whispers that gnawed at my mind or by the simple act of attraction. But it really didn't matter anymore. This was my life, and I accepted it wholeheartedly. Have you been training like I asked? I reached up and ran my fingers through her hair while keeping an eye out for any of my soldiers that may wander past, since I knew all too well that she didn't want public displays of affection. Not that it bothered me, since I fully understood why. It was still lovely, though, when she did things like this. Yes, I unlocked a plethora of new skills, and I designed a new weapon. Not to mention, I also helped Nyx find some magic that she enjoys. She pulled away slightly before giving me another peck on the lips and took my hand in hers again. How is Nyx? I asked as I followed closely behind her, tightened my grip on her hand, and eyed her backside with no small hunger. She's okay. She's a little depressed that she lost a duel with me earlier. So she's been sulking in bed or just asleep. I'm not sure which. She shrugged as she glided down the hallway. Nyx was much like a daughter to me, though that may be partly because of how much time we spend together or because I'm just head over heels for her mother. Poor girl. I nodded my head as I thought it over. Nyx was very prideful, so no doubt she was depressed at her first real defeat. Yeah, but she did well. I'm proud of her. She stopped and looked back at me, and I felt a pulse in my chest as she beamed happily. I was absolutely smitten, beyond any doubt. What magic did she get a hold of? I knew Nyx was predominantly a mage, but the last I knew, she didn't really enjoy a lot of blades, so I was worried that she would suffer the same fate that many mages did. I gave her the gravity orb I have, on top of the water core. But she was using a few other elements simultaneously, not to mention the wand she has or the dual battle axes that I made her. She shrugged as she turned away and pulled me further down the hall. I didn't know where she was going, but it didn't matter. Do you think perhaps that is too much for a child to learn? The Empress treated it a bit too nonchalantly that the princess was so diverse in combat. No? As I said, she did really well. Honestly, near the end, she used gravity magic to lock me in place. If I didn't have all the ki I did, she may have really hurt me in the end. One day, I can see her being stronger than any of us. She clenched her fingers around mine and remained quiet for a moment while I thought about what she said. It was true, Nyx had the potential to outshine us all one day. It was rare to see someone who could use all three of the core body affinities. Not just rare, but unheard of. It was always a trade, and there was always a sacrifice. I was born without magic, but my ki affinity was high. But I gave that up as well. I only chose the path of the soul to further amplify my blade work because, in the end, the only thing I would ever rely on was my skill and nothing more. I see. Moving forward, I will train Nyx to the best of my ability with her axes. I appreciate you, Alessia. So very much. Anyway, do you want to go on a date? She stopped and spun around. Her cloak danced on the draft of her movements, and her emerald eyes flickered. My eyes were drawn to her perfectly sculpted face, and I swooned as I stared at her. I would love to, but what about Nyx? I couldn't help but worry about leaving her on her own. She will be fine. As long as she has her books, she will be distracted enough. Besides, now, she just needs space so she can process what happened. She stopped in the middle of the hallway and glanced around. We somehow ended up on the fringe of the Praetorian stronghold. It was strangely empty outside a few guards stationed in key points. The others must be busy training, which is good. Are you sure? I didn't doubt her, but I felt terrible not including her in our plans. Yes. She walked close to me and laced her arms through mine. Besides, it would be nice to have a moment just for us two, no? She pulled my arm into her chest and gave me a set of puppy eyes that could rival Nyx's. Any reservations I had in that moment faded away, and I nodded. Of course. It would be wonderful to spend time with you, my love. I grinned at her as I threw on that extra part to get a reaction out of her. Her face darkened slightly, her eyes watered near the corners, and she nodded. Good. Let's go to the lake. Oh, I know you probably won't be able to, but can you eat food? I don't particularly have the desire to, but if it's something you want to do, We can. Food, sadly, had no meaning to me anymore. My body didn't need it to function, nor did hunger ever assail me. But if it made her happy, then it would be something that I could attempt to do. Okay, I can try to make something small for us then. Maybe pizza of some sort. Her face scrunched up slightly, just like Nyx's does when she's in thought. It was scary how much alike those two were. The funny part is that they were both utterly oblivious to it. What is pizza? The foreign word left my mouth and left a strange feeling on my tongue. It's dough that is often baked, and on top is any sauce you can imagine, melted cheese, and whatever else you want to throw on there. It's quick and easy depending on the kind that you want to make, so I figured it would be the best option we had. She leaned her head into me as we walked down the hallway and towards the kitchen. It was thoughtful of her, but in the end, it didn't really matter to me. I just wanted to spend time with her. While we are out, let's talk about our plan for leaving the domain, since I'm almost certain you want to do that as soon as possible. Oh yeah, we can talk about it. Plus, there are also a few things that I want to run past you about the Praetorians. But most of that can wait. I just want to spend some time with you. She beamed a wide-toothed smile at me, and I couldn't help but fall a little further into her grasp at that moment. Slowly but surely, I was starting to be consumed by her, and at this point, I didn't think I could escape, even if I wanted to. I hummed to myself happily as I closed the latch on the container. From the inside, the sweet smell of freshly baked pizza was seeping from the crevices, and it took everything that I had not to tear it open and devour it. I was in such a good mood. I asked Alessia out on a date for the first time as a more spur-of-the-moment thing. We are both always working and never really got to spend time together. So, instead, I made it happen. Granted, I was leaving Nyx out, but that would have to be the price I paid. Next time, though, I would happily take her out with us on a family date. As that thought swam across my mind, I paused. Family date? Huh? Why did those words feel so right? Would Alessia count as Nyx's mom? Stepmom? How does that even work? I toyed with the thoughts as I grabbed the container's handle and walked out of the room. I don't think it matters all that much to me. It is all the same in the end. I pushed the door that led to my kitchen outwards and stumbled into the hallway. Alessia was resting against the far wall with her arms crossed, and her eyes were slightly glazed over. Are you all right? I asked as I got close to her and laced my arms through hers. Yeah, I'm just thinking. The veil that had fallen across her eyes fell away, and she flashed me a smile. Are you sure? I asked once more as I pulled her arm into me. Was I being overly touchy? Maybe, but I didn't care. Right now, I just needed. Yeah, it's really nothing to worry about. Just work stuff. I stared at her for a second and tried to discern if she was lying to me or not, but I couldn't tell. At times, her face could be rather impassive. If you say so. If there was something wrong with her, I wouldn't push it. She would tell me when she was ready. Besides, if anyone was guilty of not talking about themselves, it was me. The mere thought of opening up to someone scared me. It made me feel vulnerable, and that was something that I wanted to avoid. I do say so. She turned to me and gave me a small smirk, and I grinned back at her. But I still stored this information away for later use. So tell me, Calixa, where do you intend to take us? My name left her lips, and I felt my heart jump in my chest. Honestly, let's just go to the lake. It's the prettiest place in the domain right now. I honestly wouldn't have minded taking her somewhere outside the domain, but I had Nyx to worry about. Not that I didn't trust in her or her ability to take care of herself, but the security aspect would be a pain to deal with. A pretty place, with an even prettier woman. Alessia's voice took a huskier tone as she complimented me. I'm sure you say that to every woman you meet. I teased her back slightly, but her calling me pretty left warmth in my chest. Only the ones that matter. She shifted her head towards me and gave me a wink. Oh, so there are more than me? For a second, I felt my heart drop. But the fear quickly faded when I realized that there hopefully wouldn't be anyone else. She is with me or at work. Yeah, there is another. She nodded her head, and I suddenly felt a little dejected. Did I mean that little to her? Oh. The words left my mouth coated with sadness. It felt like the world was crashing down around me, and I didn't know how to take it. The silence hung in the air between us for a few heartbeats as I pondered what went wrong. Was it my work? Was it because I didn't open up to her as much as I could have? Thousands of questions rushed through my mind like a torrent, and I felt jealousy blossoming in my chest. Who is she? Oh, are you jealous? Alessia stopped walking, and she stared at me with that stupid smirk of hers. I'm a little angry if I'm going to be real with you. I pulled my arm away from her and crossed them. A large part of me really hoped that she was just kidding. Come now, Calixa, You know, the only other woman in my life I talk to is Nyx. Her smirk grew wider, and relief coursed through my veins. But there was no small amount of indignation behind that. That's not fair. I crossed my arms and turned my head away from her. How dare she get me going like that? I was scared that she found someone else. Sorry, I couldn't help it. She chuckled nervously at me, but I could only roll my eyes. Alessia, please never do that again. You scared me. The relief that I felt made me weak in the knees. The mere idea of losing her hurt me in a way that I wasn't ready for. I'm sorry, my lady. She walked forward and interlaced her arm with mine once more. I'll forgive you. But I need you to know that this relationship has to work. We both have too much at stake for it to fall apart. I refuse for us to fail. I chastised her as my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just any normal relationship where if it ended we could both go our separate ways. Our lives depended on each other, and if I died, so did everyone else here. We were bound to each other in a way that nobody else could ever be, and because of that, I refuse for it to fall apart. We have to stay an item now, no matter what. Worry not, my dearest Calixa. No one else could ever hope to compare to you. She flashed me another heartwarming grin, and all my irritation faded away at once. This damn woman. Left speechless, I brought my menu up, and with a quick motion, I teleported us to the far side of the lake, which wasn't devastated by the duel I had earlier. 15 minutes later, I was settled onto the blanket I spawned in, and I was enjoying the sunlight that was caressing my flesh. The lake's surface held small ripples that pulsed across its surface from the soft gusts of wind that pushed through the trees. It was a beautiful day. I sat forward, undid the latch on the container, and quickly opened it, revealing its contents. Desperation grew within me as I stared at the large pizza, still radiating waves of heat off its surface. My mouth watered as I reached out towards the first slice and brought it up towards my mouth. Strings of cheese clung from the slice on my hand and stretched downwards towards the rest of the pizza. Damn, I didn't realize that I made it that cheesy. But that was how I liked it. I bit into the pizza, and immediately the flavor sank into my tongue and flooded my mouth. Never has food tasted so strongly before. I could pick apart the very minutiae of each flavor within the pizza, which also sadly meant that I could tell what it was missing. I always liked to think my palate was good, but now it was much more precise. It wasn't bad by any stretch. It was fantastic, but the cheeses I had didn't mesh together super well, which was strange considering that this was a blend I used to make on Earth. Maybe my sense of taste was as heightened as the rest of my senses now. This would be a pain to acclimate to, but I would get over it. Are you all right? Alessia's sweet voice tore me from my thoughts, and I looked over at her. She was sitting beside me, with her legs crossed, and was basking in the sun. Yeah, I just realized how much more sensitive my taste buds are, and now the food is missing something, which is something that I would have never noticed before. It was a shame, really. If there was one thing that I loved, it was food. I remember the first day I started working in kitchens. It was hard to figure out what I was missing, and now it feels like it was my first day again. I take it you are an avid fan of food, then? She asked as she closed her eyes and shifted weight onto her hands. The sunlight caught her skin, and I stared at the colors I hadn't seen before. Her skin tone was now close to what I had seen in my dreams. Yeah, I love eating. I used to eat a lot, and the only thing that balanced it out was that I worked for 15 hours a day. Oh, the life of a line cook. The hours were long and grueling, but the pay was great. Tell me about your life. I don't care about what the whispers tell me. I want to know about the Calixa that was before all of this. She opened her eyes and affixed me with her golden eyes. It's nothing special. I was working on becoming a chef, so I gave up most of my life for work. 15 hours a day for 5 days a week. The other 2, I either slept or partied. I mused on the memories as I spoke to her. How many nights did I get shit-faced at a party, sleep for 4 hours, and go back to work? A few too many times, and one would think I had learned my lesson by then. My memories tell me I was the same. Granted, I wasn't training to be a chef. Instead, I joined the Order of the Blue Rose and worked every day to be the best I could be, to provide for myself and my brother. Her face fell slightly at the mention of her brother, and it broke my heart a little. So I set the slice of pizza that I was munching on down and slid over to her. Tell me about him. It was a touchy subject, but at the same time, I wanted to know more about the woman that sat across from me. I only knew the barest hints, but I wanted to know more. When we were younger, he was great. He was driven, but he was kind. We both came from nothing, and we never forgot it. Well, I never did, at least. Near the end, he did. She grew a little sullen, and I laid an arm across her and pulled her into me. We sat there in silence together and stared at the lake. Perhaps it was rude of me to pry, but I wanted to be closer to her. Alessia, do you hate him? I don't hate him. I just hate what he became, and I'll hate him until he comes to his senses. She pressed her head against mine, but her words struck me strangely. What do you mean? Someone like my brother could never be truly killed. He still lives, and I feel him brimming just under the surface, desperate to be released from his chains. I sat there and thought back to the last time I saw him when I watched Alessia die, and I felt like a torrent of ice-cold water washed over me. Can I tell you something? Of course. I'm always here for you. She pulled away from me slightly to get a better view of my face. While you were unconscious, I slept next to you, waiting for you to wake up, and last night, you mentioned him by name and asked why he betrayed us. I thought nothing of it until I fell asleep, and I was somehow drugged into your dream. I watched you die, and I was powerless. Emotions that I held deep within me came to the surface as tears built up in the corner of my eyes. She sat there for a moment in stunned silence, before she reached out and pulled me into her. I'm sorry you had to see something like that. She murmured softly in my ear as I wept in her embrace. Just promise me you won't do something like that again. My words came out begging more than anything else, but I couldn't help it. What I watched was genuinely horrible. I'll do my best. For you and Nix, at least. I smiled and nodded my head slightly. That was the best answer I could have hoped for, at least. Thank you, Alessia. I pushed away from her slightly, took a deep breath to clear my nerves, and wiped away some of the tears. Anyways, do you want to help me design some stuff for the guard while we are together? I had some ideas for armor to outfit the Palatines that I wanted to do, and I wanted her input. While this was a date, I didn't see this as work. Just me sitting here with the woman of my dreams, working on projects together. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time by one of the Praetorians. This one was shrouded in a cloak that drug across the ground and had a pair of eyes that glimmered like a set of candles in the darkness. Its hand was long and lanky, but covered by a black glove. The moment the letter touched my hand, it vanished in a muted display of gray light, leaving me stunned for a second. I sighed as I reached out and quickly undid the seal to read the contents. Redrick, I will be departing the domain in a few hours. However, I am unsure of the time difference between us. Alessia, Nix, and a few of my Palatines will accompany me. We will only stay for a few days at the most and intend to explore the town at our leisure. Because of the nature of our guards, we took a few precautions to shroud their origins, as I am aware of how many people within the town may act. Calixa. Her handwriting was tight and meticulous and flowed effortlessly across the paper. It was a pleasure to read, unlike most of the stuff that touched my desk. At least she was trying to make my life easier. Maybe I could keep this entire thing quiet. At least as quiet as possible. I folded the sheet of paper, placed it in my pocket, crossed my arms, and stared across the ground towards the shimmering purple haze that denoted the entrance of the domain. I was going to wander around the town and maybe pick up a few goods, but perhaps I should wait here for some time. After all, that meant I could better control this situation. It took a couple of hours, and the sun had already started its journey across the sky and was well past its halfway point. The air was cool today, the wind didn't kick all that much, and small clusters of white clouds traveled across the sky in tight packs. The outside of the domain rippled, and it caught my attention, causing me to quickly stand up. From it came a being who wore a simple black cloak that seemed to hover above its body. All that radiated from the open hood was darkness and a piercing gaze that seemed to resemble that of the royal guard stationed outside my house. I quickly activated my analysis skill and regarded the being that stood before me. Its name was painted a deep purple with twinges of other colors leaking in. Palatine Commander. We stared at each other for a few quick seconds before it reached its hand back into the domain. The purple haze shimmered in various spots as more cloaked figures broke through it, totaling 6 altogether. Each wore a simple black cloak that obscured their appearance and hid what lay underneath. It was a great cover, but I wasn't sure how it would make things easier on me. A team of 6 cloaked figures followed us around was sure to draw attention. A few heartbeats later, the haze shimmered again, and Alessia walked out. She wore a black overshirt that opened up near her neck, revealing a white undershirt with a piece of purple fabric stretched down from her collar and disappeared into the overshirt. Her silver hair was tied in a high ponytail, with a single black band that held it all in place. But the most striking thing of all was her name, a vibrant orange, with twinges of silver slowly seeping into it all. From what I could tell, she was breaking into raid boss status, and the horror in me was beyond words. Raid bosses were uncommon entities, as it was, so staring one in the face was a bit surreal. She took a step forward, grabbed both pieces of the fabric by her neck, and rolled her shoulders. The blades resting on her back shifted with her as she did it. "Hello, Redrick." Her words held significantly more emotion than the last time I talked to her, and this time I could feel the disdain in her words. She really didn't like me. "Greeting, Lady Alessia." I gave her a nod and what felt like a tight-lipped smile. A few seconds later, Nyx came rocketing through the haze. Her hair had grown a bit since the time I saw her and was reaching past her shoulders. The light caught her raven-colored hair and glimmered like feathers. Her emerald eyes were wide as she looked around, and a wide grin split her face. She was wearing what I could only describe as a mage's outfit, but it was unlike anything that I had seen before. Her robe was a solid chest piece with purple runes that crossed its surface. Around her stomach, the robe split into two pieces that stopped just short of her knees. Each took on a different color, with the left being the color of a freshly raging fire, while the other was a purple so dark it looked as if the abyss would spew out of it at any moment. Underneath the two flaps were a set of brown boots that stopped just short of her knees and were laced up. At first glance, the boots looked to be master-crafted and were a sight to behold. But the scariest part of her appearance was the two bearded axes peeking out from behind her back. Mages rarely double-specialized, though. Through my interactions with Asteria, I knew there was always more than meets the eye. Out of curiosity, I activated my analysis skill and looked her over. Nyx, Gravitronic War Mage. Her color was golden, just like the Empress was, though I was at a loss for what it meant. I couldn't seem to find anything in any records that I held. I was also unfamiliar with the class that she had. Perhaps someone at the Mage Guild would have an idea. "Hello again." Nyx spoke up, and I focused on her once more. This time, I saw something strange near her head. It seemed like a mass of air that was almost unperceivable, but it was there and slowly traveling around her head. "Greetings, Princess," I replied, knowing that if I didn't, I would earn Alessia's ire. A wide grin split her face as she nodded approvingly before she spun around and rushed back into the domain. It was a few heartbeats before she appeared again, this time holding hands with the Empress of Asteria. She radiated an almost sickeningly radiant aura that was hard to describe. It felt reassuring this time, but also confident. But above all else, it was comforting, like a mother's embrace. She seemed a little taller than before, and not to mention leaner. But she also felt more dangerous, like an apex predator was staring at me from underneath her usual mask. From the slits on the mask, her eyes raged like an unbidden fire, sending shivers down my spine. Her cloak, this time, was the color of freshly spilled blood that danced gently on the wind, and when it did, it revealed a pair of brown boots, much like the ones that Nyx was wearing. But everything else was obscured. "Hello, Redrick." Her voice was more feminine than before, but there was power in her words. A power that made me feel helpless. "Greetings, Empress. It's a pleasure to see you again. I was surprised that you came. If anything, it was a pain. So much could go wrong in such a short amount of time. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing," she replied as she walked forward. Nyx was still attached to her hand and matched her step for step. The sight alone was enough to warm my heart. It wasn't often that a noble expressed affection like that to their children. My father rarely did it, nor did my mother. "I understand. Well, if you come with me, I'll take you to where you will stay for the next few days. Normally, I'd have arranged for a nicer place, but because of your position, I deemed it best for you to stay at my house, as it is the safest place in town." "Thank you, Redrick. I appreciate it." She nodded her head and looked around the area. "Of course. If you need anything, let me know." I glanced around at everyone and saw that the 6 cloaked figures had vanished. It was almost as if they had ceased to exist. "Redrick, tell me about this area." The Empress spoke up again, and I returned my attention to her. It was probably for the best that I let it be. "Well, this area is called the Neutral Lands. It was once the heart of the Assyrian Empire before it fell a few centuries ago." I turned on my heel and hastened towards one of the side entrances of the town. I wanted to attract as little attention as possible. "Tell me about them." "Not much is really known. They just appeared overnight. Before we knew it, they had spread across much of the continent. Their war golems made up most of their armies, and they were, and still are, nightmares to fight." I explained it to her and shuddered with the memories. Even now, the war golems still prowl the land. For the most part, there were only small pockets left in the outside world. But here in the Neutral Lands, they were many. "War golems? Can you describe them?" she asked as I pushed the door open for them. "They are metal monstrosities. Some looked like humans, while others were as tall as trees. Some have many eyes, while others have one on their head. They are all varied, but the most common ones are the humanoid ones. The recent memory of one still haunted my memory. It looked like someone cast a metal skeleton and gave it life. That's interesting. How did the Assyrians fall? Well, a few centuries ago, the strongest mages of the kingdom gathered and crafted the strongest summoning spell they could. And much to our benefit, a few heroes answered the call. Assyria fell in a few short years, though now the golems still plague the lands. I recounted the tale from memory, though I wasn't sure how much of it was true. Mother, can I fight one of those golems? Nyx piped up and broke my train of thought. Something told me that the child was a battle junkie or was on the verge of blossoming into one. Maybe. If you want, before we head back home, we can ask Redrick where we can find some. Her mother replied to her, and it immediately reaffirmed my thoughts. She was a battle junkie, and her mother was an enabler. Octavian POV. I stood on top of the hill and gazed at the sprawling plains. All around me, the troops were busy repaving roads and cutting down trees to convert into more resources for us to use. They were like an army of ants as they worked and swarmed over the projects, finishing them at a blistering rate. War Aster, the preparations are complete for an outpost. The scouts are already reporting a large horde on the way. The scouts estimate a force almost double our number. We expect contact in no less than 5 minutes. Caesarea appeared next to me out of the blue. The woman's flesh and bone had long since vanished, only to be replaced by the faint green hue of the spirit. Good. Alert the troops. If we fracture in the face of the horde, we will be overwhelmed. Already, plans started to form in my mind at the information. How the mages alter the terrain. We need to funnel them and eliminate the numerical advantage they have. Have the heavy troops take the front line and lock down the horde, and we will grind them down. It was a rough plan, but there were very few things I could do to staunch the flow of undead effectively. So we have to chew through them one piece at a time. Have the mages who have mana left over switch to fire magic, so we can burn them out as we hold them. I crossed my arms and stared out across the plain. As you command. The captain spun and floated down the hill, leaving me with my thoughts. This was a large horde, easily almost double our manpower. But where they had numbers, we had quality. I stared across the troops and watched as the ground trembled and large earthen barriers rose out of the ground. Quickly, the soldiers cutting down trees shifted the logs to shore up weak areas and hold the flow of the coming undead directly. Thankfully, they wouldn't be smart enough to find their way around. Hordes were pretty easy to deal with because of this. The earth trembled as walls rose from the dirt, and debris rained from ledges that rose towards the sky. They weren't mighty by any stretch, but they would do enough to stem the tide of the undead to push the advantage to us. But even with the dedication that was at play, they weren't fast enough. In the distance, the twisted choir of broken moans filled the air. It sounded like a symphony of broken screams as figures pushed through the fog that twisted in the distance. At first, it was stragglers who were running full bore straight at our encampment with their minds no doubt empty with all but the desire to consume. Their clothes were tattered and destroyed, and even from this distance, I could see the festering pus that coated faces that were half-eaten. It would have been the thing of nightmares, but unfortunately, this was reality. I crossed my arms and gazed down upon my legion. I would not interfere just yet. For now, I wished to see how they did in battle. Earthen spikes shot from the barriers rising from the ground and rushed towards the first few, about to make contact. The stone tore through flesh like a sword through paper, and black congealed blood coated the earth. More forms tore through the mist in a full run. Their clothes were tattered, and their bodies were broken. These beings were nothing more than puppets serving a false master, and I held nothing but pity in my heart for them. I watched as more spikes shot from the wall and down the next wave as quickly as the first. But I couldn't get my hopes up. More forms poured from the mist. Dozens became hundreds as they limped towards the front lines. Their eyes were lifeless, and their bodies were empty. I shuddered internally while staring at them. Would this have been my fate if the Empress didn't save us? Would I have been doomed to be a mindless slave to another? I pushed down the intrusive thoughts as I watched my troops with a keen eye. Now wasn't the time to linger on what-ifs. My legion quickly formed themselves as instructed behind the earthen barrier. The troops with heavy tower shields marched to the front and drove their shields into the dirt. Mages and rangers took positions in the outcropping that were made previously to keep them out of the way of danger. These were my most valuable units since killing undead at range would be the best way to do things. At least, that was the hope, but we will see how well it performs here. A volley of magic ripped through the air and hummed with etheric energy as rocks, fire, wind, and water shredded the first line of undead marching toward us. Line after line fell, but the zombies marching toward us were as unyielding as water. They clambered over the piles of the bodies of their comrades, uncaring of their deaths. Slowly but surely, they marched forward until they contacted the tower shields tucked slightly into the earthen barrier. The Rangers, seeing their chance, let loose a volley of highly accurate arrows that slammed through eye sockets and dropped zombies left and right. The fighting may last a few days, so now we just hold. War Aster. A voice tore me from my thoughts, and I glanced backward. It was the human mercenary captain by the name of Gunther. His outfit was pristine and well-kept, denoting his previous service. Nominally, I'd have looked down on a soldier serving another nation, but times were different. Yes, Captain, I asked as I turned my attention back to the attrition warfare that was unfurling below me. The others are clamoring for some action. He was curt and to the point, which I respected fully. Ah yes, as is the nature of a warrior. They will have their time. For now, my soldiers will lock down the horde and grind them down. Once we have broken most of the line, you all will be free to cut them down. I crossed my arms and ran through the plan in my head for the 100th time. With my troops' discipline, we can hold back the tide and take minimum losses. Once the mercenaries make a play, then I risk losing another vital asset. I understand. I'm glad that I'm serving under a commander who values the lives of their soldiers. The human replied as he stepped up next to me. Those who willingly sacrifice their army for small gains are not suited to be a commander. I will calculate everything we do to ensure we lose the fewest troops possible. Life was valuable, but maybe not in the sense that he was thinking. Troops are expensive to train and even more so to lose. It was something that I couldn't afford to do. I see. How's the battle? He asked in a bid to change the subject. It goes well. We are locking them down. I say we should have killed enough of them in a day or so for the mercenaries to come in and clean up. I pulled my eyes away from the battle, spun on my heel, and marched further into the officer encampment. A few of the highest-ranking officers of the Legion were here, milling about and making plans for the future, while some of the mercenary leaders were here, gazing at a map of Asteria, trying to make plans themselves. Everything was going as smoothly as I could hope for. But I still had to be ready for anything. Officers on me, I called out as I walked further into the command tent. In the center sat a large wooden table, with the map of this portion of Asteria splayed across its surface. The four corner flaps of the tent were wide open, and the amber light of the dying sun spilled into the area and mingled with the vestiges of fog slowly creeping in. One by one, the highest-ranking officers present trickled in, save Caesarea, who was leading the troops in the outpost's defense. In front of me stood Cerularius, who was the commander of the Engineer Corps. To his left was Avienus, the commander of the Magi Corps. They were both twin skeletons, though I didn't know them much in life. Really, there were only a few memorable faces, but that was neither here nor there. The next was Almari, the acting commander of all the Praetorian forces present. Her flesh was semi-solid, and her hair was braided into a style reminiscent of the warrior maidens of Asteria's past. Her light blue eyes hardly reflected the light flooding into the tent, though the quiet power she radiated was mighty. She was part of the Empress' hand, so her power was to be feared in the end. Gunther stood close by as the head of the human mercenaries, and next to him was a giant snake humanoid who wore armor that looked like it was crafted from obsidian. It reminded me of the warrior outfits of the empires from the Far East, with how the metal formed into a skirt near the hips and flared out. It was gaudy, but I would hold my tongue on the matter. Captain Oatley. I gave the snake a nod, which was returned with a quick tongue flick as green reptilian eyes settled on me. Now that we have arrived, we can discuss the next phase of this war, I told them as I pointed to the map where we were located. We are still quite a ways out of the city, but we need to capture some of the surrounding suburbs and start converting into a forward operating base while we launch attacks into the city. Though I will warn you, we will be in range of the city defenses shortly. As I spoke, I quickly pointed out the areas of interest. Tell me, War Master, what are the defenses like? As Oatley spoke, he drew his SS much like a hiss. Long-range bombardment is the first few layers. Once we crack them, we have to deal with urban warfare, which will be a nightmare. City defenses were set up to grind down attackers. Thankfully, we didn't have to deal with the potent anti-air defenses. The sewers were well guarded in themselves. Unfortunately, the only way forward will be through no man's land, but thankfully our engineer corps was working on something just for that. The ground trembled as a monstrous roar split the air. I placed my hand on the hilt of my blade and stared out across the battlefield. For the last day, the horde has pressed into my legion nonstop. Bodies were torn apart, and congealed blood pooled at the base of the soldiers on the front line. Shields and swords were slick with dried blood, and metal was chipping and falling apart. This type of warfare would have been unimaginable if this was back in our glory days. But now, here we are, fighting day and night, with blades that were as broken as our bodies. But while our bodies may be broken, our spirit will never waver. Especially not against this new foe. It was a giant undead that towered over the battlefield. Its body was crested with blood-stained bone, and each fist was as large as a carriage and sank into the ground as it used them to push itself forward. It was a monstrous amalgamation of humans and animals, but neither was truly prominent. I didn't have to stare at it to know what it was. It was a juggernaut, a rare evolution of the zombie brute that would only keep growing larger until it was slain. Unfortunately, there weren't any troops on the front line that could handle the beast, and I wasn't about to expend my reserves or elites to face such a foe, which left only me to fight it, and it was a fight that I was all too willing to take. It's been so long since I've last fought, and my body yearned for me to spill blood once more. For the first time in a long time, I felt a grin cross my face as I clenched the hilt of my sword and marched out to meet this new foe. All around, the troops gazed up at me as power coursed through my veins, and for the first time, the dreariness of this cursed existence was lifted. My march became a jog, and my jog became a gait as power cycled through my muscles. At first, it was a dull ache, as my muscles had to acclimate to everything once more, but the dull ache quickly gave way to a strength that only grew in intensity. In only a few blinks of the eye, I crashed into the front line and let loose a war cry that split the air like thunder. I could feel my form stretching as I drew my blade, swung it in a deadly arc, and cleaved through 3 of the mindless undead as if they were nothing more than wet paper. As the cursed life left them, it empowered me more, and I fell into muscle memory as my blade cleaved body after body apart, and I cut my way through the undead as if they were nothing more than strands of grass. But these were nothing more than an appetizer for what was to come. Yet there was no end in sight. Another monstrous roar split my lips as I raised my foot high, channeled all my strength, and slammed my foot into the ground. The stone ground trembled as rods of earth rose from the ground and impaled dozens of undead. The sheer act of murder further fueled my bloodlust as I dashed through them and rushed toward the juggernaut, who roared a challenge at me. The monster swung a fist at me that cut through the air faster than what should have been possible. But I steeled myself and caught the punch with the flat of my blade. The sheer strength of the hit pushed me across the ground until I caught myself and pushed the hand away. I channeled more strength in my legs, and flashes of lightning arced from me and into the surrounding area. I clenched my jaw as I rushed forward and swung my blade toward one of the massive hands it used to keep itself up. My blade bit into the bone that shielded the soft flesh underneath but failed to penetrate it. The monster took a step back and tried to swat me away as if I were nothing more than an ant. But that's where it made its first mistake. I wasn't the demon of Asteria for no reason. More power seeped into me, and the blue arcs of lightning quickly became blood red and dug craters into the bone that comprised the juggernaut. I stretched my hand out and caught the fist mid-swing. The surrounding air exploded into a sonic boom as the energy from the swing had nowhere else to go. Red flames flickered into existence as my body shifted once more as I grew taller. Pathetic. The words left my lips like a thunderclap as I shrugged its hand away and drew my fist back. The giant monster roared and tried to bat me away once more, but my fist moved faster. Bone shattered as my fist slammed into it, and the lumbering beast stumbled backward. I didn't need my blade to win a fight like this. I roared once more, then I balled my fists together and slammed them into the ground. The earth shattered, and a shock wave shot outwards as the beast stumbled again. I pressed myself off the ground and jumped upwards, quickly scaling the distance to its head. The monster quickly reclaimed its wits, but it was still far too late. The second I landed, I brought my fist down in a series of crushing blows. Bone splintered into hundreds of pieces as I hammered away. Bone quickly gave way to flesh, and the monster struggled underneath me as my fist sank into its soft flesh. It roared as it tried to jerk around to throw me from its back, but my grip was too firm. Compared to the creatures I've fought in my life, this was nothing more than a toddler. But it was still more than what my troops could handle. So I would need to end this fight before it spilled over to them. Another surge of power coursed through my veins as I reached down to grab the crest of bones near its head. I clenched it so tightly beneath my fingers that the bone splintered, and I concentrated all the power I had into my legs and stomped into its back. The beast let out a pained roar as it fell to its knees. Ki and magic coursed through my hands as I jumped from the monster's back. I reared back, launched another punch towards the fallen monster's head, and watched as the bone fractured under. Again and again, I pummeled the creature until it ceased to move. The bloodlust kicked up within me, and I fought against the desire to lose myself to it. I was far past those days of giving in to those urges. I am the War Master, and I will act the part. Once I was sure that the monster was dead, I took a step back and saw that the front line had pushed the horde back with my intervention and was mopping up the survivors. Which was good. The second the last undead falls here, we can move into the city. But in the meantime, I will fight next to my warriors. It's been far too long since I've experienced combat, and now my blood is boiling. I reached out and pushed aside the dead beast's hand. Its once immense weight was now nothing more than a bother. But I knew that no matter how strong I felt now, I still paled compared to what I was in life. The day I died, it took an army to kill me, but I would reclaim that strength, no matter what it took. I gripped the handle of my blade, yanked it from the body of the juggernaut, and brandished it again. Unfortunately, with my troops around, I can't rely on the strength of my body, so for now, I will harness it with the power of my blade. It only took a few moments to clear the last of the undead with my presence. The mercenaries flanked the rest of the horde, and my troops ground them down as they tried to surge forward. But without that juggernaut, they were nothing more than chaff. The moment the last zombies hit the ground in a broken heap, I roared with all my strength. The air split, and the sky darkened, and everyone around me raised their voice to meet mine. For Asteria, pride flowed through my veins, and a tiny portion of the shame that I felt had lifted. I may have proven myself now, but I will do it again and again until my honor is restored. Swords bashed against shields as the troops celebrated their victory. For now, I would give them this moment, for they have earned it. But once they were done, I would instruct the quartermaster to collect the belongings of the dead and prepare for the funeral ceremonies. No matter how busy we were, we still needed to honor the dead and prepare them for their final rest, for they above all else deserve it. While the undead was busy picking through the remains of the zombie, I grabbed my sword and used the dead juggernaut to clean its venerable edge before I slid it back into its sheath. It's been so long since I felt this alive. I rolled my head, shot my gaze across my undead, and watched as they quickly picked apart the dying horde. They were efficient, and they didn't tire. That meant work got done at a blistering rate, making logistical planning all the easier. I crossed my arms and scanned the battlefield as I devised a plan. We were nearing the kill zone for the outer city perimeter. That meant we needed to fortify our line and repair more roads to ensure supplies got to the front. Once we took the town, I could get tracks to the city. That way, I could have a fully functioning logistics center that could craft our weapon needs and act as a central defense point. The pressing issue, however, will be getting past the forward observers. No doubt they knew of our arrival and were already preparing themselves. Amari, I called out, knowing she was nearby. After all, the Empress did need to protect her investments. She appeared in front of me in the blink of an eye, almost as if the air had birthed her. She glanced around before resting her eyes on me and nodded. She was never much for words. Always the strong, silent type. Amari, gather your assassins and start gathering intel on the forward observers. The assassin nodded her head at my words and, in the blink of an eye, vanished in the wind as if she were nothing more than ash. Even in death, she never changed. Though, even in life, I hardly knew her. Throughout the legions, she was known as the Silent Executioner. She was a fleeting ghost in life, and wherever she traveled, heads rolled, and people vanished. Even the public, who knew very little of her, knew of the legends that surrounded her. I could think of a few examples of some rhymes the children have come up with. My favorite was the story of the Reaper who lingers in the dark and hunts down all the naughty children. It always brought a smile to my face when I thought about it. But that was neither here nor there. For now, I needed to make sure that the crusade was as smooth, especially with the next phase about to come into play. A few hours later, I stood staring at a map that the advanced scouts had drawn. The undead here have already set up defensive perimeters around the kill zone, and no doubt the security was getting beefed up in the process. The undead surrounding the city showed signs of intelligence, much like the troops I was wielding. At best, they were all mindless and could easily be overwhelmed. At worst, they were well-disciplined and would force the crusade to grind to a halt as we tried to ply their weak points. No matter how I thought it through, things looked slightly grim. The kill zone would be thick with long-range artillery, though until I heard from Almari, I wouldn't know if they refitted the placements. At one point, we were rolling out experimental cannons to strike at long-range targets. Though in use in tandem with our mages, the long-range bombardment would be potent. But I prayed to whatever god that listened it wasn't the case. I didn't have the materials or the troops to deal with such a threat. I reached out towards my pen, tapped it against the table, and glanced through my notes from the engineer corps. The idea of the steam engine has spread through their ranks, and they were already working on implementing it into other things. The most promising of all was what they had labeled a steam tank powered by a miniature version of the steam engine. There were discussions going on about using it to pierce no man's land and carry troops through the bombardment. With mages on board, they should be able to deflect a lot of the incoming attacks, which would ease the need for heavy armor. But we were still critically low on a lot of resources, which was severely hampering our efforts to circumvent their defenses. I might scrape together enough metal to create a tank prototype, but we were also facing a time shortage. Once we take the city, I could dedicate more manpower to experimental designs that could help us further our crusade. But that was for the future more than anything. For now, I would allow for a commission of a single tank with what I had on hand and use it as a trump card if it pans out. I placed the paper back on the table and skimmed through the rest of the paperwork. Let's see, the quartermaster commander has sent me a detailed invoice of all of our equipment and who currently is what. Next to that was a message from the commander who was tasked with restoring infrastructure and ensuring that the supply lines were kept up to par. So far, it was going well, and the roads were being repaired and expanded to handle higher traffic levels. Pipes were getting laid recently to better distribute the water supply, and materials were being mined for the war effort. Stone flowed steadily to the front, and logs were getting processed so buildings could be repaired. I nodded my head and set the stack of papers down on the table. Good. Everything was moving smoothly. All that was left was the killing zone, and how I was going to get through it. A flicker of wind pulled me from my thoughts, and my eyes shifted toward the source. Amari stood there with a notebook in her hand. Her eyes glimmered softly as she passed it over to me before she vanished once more. Which was fine. I didn't expect her to sit around and talk. Which was good. If there was anything that I appreciated, it was how curt she was. I flicked open the first page and skimmed the contents. So, the security detail has been increased, much to my dismay. But on the flip side, the artillery is still ran and maintained by a mage corps, which is good. Once we take out the forward observers, we could disrupt the casting ritual to minimize casualties. That also left the communication lines, which appeared to be relatively rudimentary. A small fleet of carrier pigeons is the primary way they shifted information around. So that would be an easy fix. We just have to ensure that we are using magic to jam any communication they may try to force through. At this moment, I think I will use Amari and her assassins to take out the forward observers in a surprise attack. With them reeling backward, I can send some elite strike teams through the kill zone to take out the mage groups. Once we silence the artillery, I could afford to send my legion in, clean up, and establish a beachhead to the city. It would be a risky play, but at this point, it was the best plan that I had. All that was left was to put it into motion. A few days had passed since I had completed my plan. The Legion had been shifted around and now encompassed the city's outskirts. Amari was already leading assassination groups to take out as many forward observers as we could. While taking them out would limit the accuracy of the bombardment, I knew they would result in a blind fire, which was the most preferable outcome. At least with the mages in the squads, we could redirect some of the fire. A mage's shield would be strong enough to deflect a glancing hit. But straight, accurate bombardment would shred us before we even considered getting close enough. But we have moved far past large unit tactics, which should ease the burden of this assault. Perhaps I should instruct them to build trenches and settle in, as we could easily expect a full counterattack within the coming days. That way, we could funnel a horde into choke points while shielding our troops from bombardment. The other option we could explore would be building tunnels that cut through the kill zone. They would shield troops, allow us to defend as needed, and expand steadily. Both options were good, but we would best be suited for a gradual expansion as we slowly cut off the long-range bombardment. With the tunnel system in play, we could quickly move troops around undetected, though it risked sappers destroying the tunnel. I strummed my fingers against my arm as I stared across no man's land. There were so many variables at play here that, at some point, I felt like I wasn't sure what the best option was. When we were living, it was much easier to predict what would happen. We were all creatures of habit at the end of the day. I could run circles around most other commanders, but now that we were undead, everything was predictable yet uncertain. I pulled my gaze away from the kill zone, spun around, and walked back toward the encampment. Within the next few hours, we should get the signal from Amari, and once we do, we can advance. A few hours had passed, and the sun had set in the sky. Not even the ambient moonlight could chase away the darkness, which was good. Nighttime was the best time for an operation like this. War Master, the other mercenaries are ready when you are. Gunther's familiar voice floated through the darkness, but I didn't bother to turn my head to him. It's not like it would matter in any way. They will need to hold their position for a moment longer. Once we cross into no man's land, the bombardment will start. Once their artillery is silenced, they will be free to fight as they please. I crossed my hands behind my back as I stared at the sky, waiting for the signal. You have been very vague on what to expect from this long-range bombardment. A lot of the troops are doubting the truth to your words. To be expected. But let me let you in on a little secret, Gunther. We wage war far differently here than where you come from. The kill zones that protect our vital cities staved off hordes far larger than the ones we fought. The only reason we fell was betrayal and being drowned in bodies. But perhaps seeing firsthand will change your mind. I shrugged off his words, not really concerned with what they thought. Darkness swirled around us as the seconds marched by. Gunther remained silent as we waited, which was no bother for me. The silence was golden. In the fleeting moments, I got it. Suddenly, a slight flare of light traveled up the sky, exploding into a wide firework. Once I saw it, I knew it was the signal. I could hear dozens of footsteps break through the silence without having to utter a single word. I stood my ground as I watched the undead spill across the kill zone. Each was grouped in tight squads of 4, with a mage near the center that cast a light blue shield around them. Gunther, a word of advice. When you cross into no man's land, and you hear whistling, I wouldn't worry about it. I told him as I counted the seconds to the inevitable first blast. And if I don't? You won't have anything to worry about then. It was a harsh statement, but it was true nonetheless. But as the words left my mouth, a brilliant explosion lit up the night sky, shattering earth and sending rubble flying through the air. The surrounding ground trembled as another explosion rocked the earth and then another. Each shot was wide and inaccurate and thankfully missed all the troops, but I knew that luck wouldn't hold. But surprise was on our side. Once the elite forces broke through the kill zones, we could hunt down the mage batteries and crack an opening into the defenses for the Greater Legion to exploit. Are you ready, Gunther? I asked as I placed my hand on the hilt of my sword. I could feel the familiar pulses of power coursing through me as my blood boiled. Are you really about to dive into that? Do you have a death wish? The man stammered out, clearly in shock at what I was about to do. I cannot die until the task given to me by the Empress is complete. There is nothing in this world that will sway me from my task. I told him as I took a step forward. Do you wish to come, or will you remain behind until the artillery is silenced? I think I will remain here for now. He grew quiet, and I didn't spare him another glance. It's not his fault that he was scared. This method of war broke many good men. So be it, I told him as I took another step forward, and my foot passed into the venerable grounds of no man's land. My blood boiled as I took another large step forward. I would never ask my men to do something if I wouldn't do it myself. I have always led from the front, in life, and now even in death. The men needed a hero, and I have donned that mantle time and time again, and there was nothing that would stop my duty. Another explosion shook the surrounding earth, blowing dirt and stone around me in a shower of debris as I closed the distance to the enemy's fortifications. I shut my mind off to the wanton destruction that reigned around me and even to the squads that couldn't deflect the magic artillery. All I could do was move further into hell. The rain of fire was slowly trickling into non-existence as more batteries were silenced as troops poured into the first line of trenches and structures. The distant sound of artillery strikes mixed with the sound of swords crashing into each other and magic tearing apart reality as forces clashed. Chaos raged around me as I marched forward, my eyes set on the forward operating post of the outer city defenses. Once we slay whoever was commanding this contingent force, our army could take it and make it our own. But I couldn't justify doing a blind bombardment of the city. We neither had the time nor the resources to rebuild it. However, the information within that building would serve us well and make the urban warfare that would occur a little less of a nightmare. I brought my sword out with a flick of my wrist and cut through a soldier who marched out to meet me. His armor bore the defaced symbol of my country and filled me with such bottomless rage. I am the arbiter of the Empress's wraith and the bearer of her will. The death of all these traitors would serve as a recompense for those still loyal. I would sever them from this unlife. Perhaps, in their true death, they could find penance for the destruction they wrought on these lands. Warriors of Asteria, to me. I bellowed as I cut down another traitorous soldier. His body blew apart from the sheer force of my strike as I stepped forward. Around me, the fighting grew more intense as I marched forward. More and more strike teams poured from no man's land into the first perimeter, meeting the traitors' forces in a clash of steel and magic. I pushed through a few more soldiers who tried to intercept me. My eyes focused on what I knew to be the command center. With each swing of my sword, another body fell onto the ground in a broken heap. My stride was relentless, and my focus was unyielding. All who betrayed us will pay the price. I took another step forward as more of my troops rallied around me. My boots dug into the gray gravel that surrounded the outer defense perimeter. I pushed forward with another step and deflected a fireball that shot towards me with the flat of my blade, sending it into the ground. Shields rose around me in a short order a second later, and magic fizzled in the surrounding air as it slammed into the shield. Once more, I felt my blood boil as a fiery passion coursed through me. Life sparked in my chest as a conflagration lit. It took all my strength to keep my mind from fracturing as a single-minded purpose tried to take root deep within me. I must kill all those who betrayed us. It was my driving purpose, yet I knew that deep down, there was something more there. But I was struggling to keep my thoughts clear. I pushed forward a few more steps and came up to the giant wooden wall that overlooked the first mage battery. Behind it, I knew that there would be more troops to contend with. Ones that were even better than the ones that we were fighting currently. Ki pulsed through my fingertips as electricity crackled, and with a great heave, I shot my fist through the wooden walls. Though it shattered and flew apart in a thunderous explosion. The filthy traitors behind the wall were unfazed as their lifeless gaze settled on me and my surrounding soldiers. An unspoken order passed through the ranks as the squad spilled into the rooms. Fighting broke out into a vicious melee as inhuman groans filled the air. Swords clashed into shields, and magic filled the air. The astral instincts tried to take over as the allure of combat bombarded my eyes and assailed my ears. It took everything I had to not fall into the primal desire for war, which was never like me. I was the war master, and I had to act like it. I stepped into the room behind my soldiers and pushed through the fighting. I shrugged off random bolts of magic that slammed into my flesh and the blades that dug through my skin. Each step brought me further into the fray, with it, my sword dancing through the air, cutting through each one of those filthy traitors as if they were nothing more than paper. Inhuman moans rattled my ears as I fell into the familiar memory of stepping and slashing. Heads rolled, and bodies fell in a broken heap as I marched forward. My mind drifted away from me as memories played in my mind. How many wars have I fought in? How many countries have I brought to heel? It was a pressing exhaustion that seeped into every fiber of my being. I was old, and I was only getting older with each passing day. I served the Emperor's father, and I served his father before that. My age pressed into me from all corners of my mind. It weighed me down in a way that I couldn't seem to put into words. It was an exhaustion that transcended something physical. But I wouldn't succumb to that exhaustion. My duty will only end once my job is complete. Maybe then I would be able to finally rest. I could even retire somewhere nice and farm for a few years. It was a strange thought, but one that I found comfort in. I pulled myself from my thoughts and glanced around the room. Broken bodies filled the area, both of my soldiers and those of the traitors. More of the early assault squads poured into the gap that I made and broke through deeper into the interior of the defensive line. I stood there and watched as they rushed forward, broke into squads, and flooded the hallways. The distant sounds of blades clashing reached my ears, and explosions rocked the wooden walls. Now, all I had to do was find the magic batteries and end them. I strolled through the boundless halls for what felt like an eternity before I came out to a large open room and came across Amari. Her outfit was as pristine as ever, and her blades dripped with dried, congealed blood. All around her, dozens of bodies clad in mage clothing lay strewn across the ground. The ritual circle was long since shattered and coated in decaying blood. All is well, I'm assuming, I asked as I walked forward into the bombardment room. Amari flicked her blades and sheathed them, and gave me a single nod. I sheathed my sword and walked across the ground, not bothering to step over the bodies of the falling. Instead, she drove the heel of her boot into them. Were there any targets that I should know of? She crossed her arms and glanced at the door leading into the next set of sprawling hallways designed to confuse and spread out attackers. Viator. The words left her mouth and hovered in the lifeless air. The mere mention of the name made my blood run cold. He was the first governor to fall, and above even that, he plunged this entire province into anarchy and destruction. Furthermore, it was used as a stepping stone to plunge the rest of Asteria into the flames of war. There was a special place in hell for that man, and I would be the one who would deliver him to it. Where? I asked as I crossed the distance between us. My hand remained clenched around the hilt of my blade as I struggled to contain the rage within me. Further in, near the headquarters. Her words were short and brisk, and I nodded my head. She gave me a nod, and her form flickered before she vanished from sight. So Viator was here. In that case, I would be the one who fights him since no one else with us would possess the strength to fight one of Death's avatars. Perhaps it was out of a sense of greed that I thought that. But I also knew it was wrong of me to have such feelings. If I let them get to my head, personal grudges would lead to my downfall. Yet, I knew I would be the only one that could fight Viator on equal terms. I clenched the hilt of my blade tightly and decided it was time to head over to the door. I would hunt down that arch-traitor and make him pay for each of his crimes. He would pay recompense with every bone in his body and with each scrap of his wretched flesh. It wouldn't be much, but it would be the first step in righting all of these wrongs. I fought through the countless horde of the undead. My mind was locked on a single purpose as I pushed through the hallway. Members of the traitor's force fell with each swipe of my sword, and bodies crashed onto the floor. I had long since lost contact with the rest of my forces and instead took my path. It wasn't like I needed them with me. No one here outside of Viator was any threat to me. Hours passed by as heads rolled. It seemed like no matter how many of the undead I killed, another took its place. It was wave after wave of cursed. My arms never tired, and my purpose never wavered. I felt alive in a way I had never before, yet boredom existed just below the surface. I couldn't feel pain, and I couldn't feel the familiar ache of muscles that were well spent. There was so much that I couldn't feel outside of anger and hatred. If I did, it was muted. This curse bit deep into my soul. More than anything, with each passing second, I wanted nothing more than to feel something. I needed something to root me into reality. Something more than just anger or sadness. I need something human. I cut through another group of traitor forces down and marched through the dimly lit hallway. Red flames cast a baleful red hue onto the rotting wood. The sounds of distant fighting reached my ears, telling me I was nearing an engagement spot. Thankfully, it seemed as if all the artillery placements were silenced, which meant that my lieutenant should launch the charge. Once we establish a foothold here, we can use the long-range bombardment to our pleasure and soften up the following line of defenses before we push into its interior. Another head rolled from its shoulders as I glanced around. I didn't have a direct blueprint of this place. Even if I did, it likely wouldn't come in handy. Everything here feels different, but there was a presence that I could feel in the distance. It was thick, felt like syrup, and was rife with evil energy. My legs drug me on, following the path of that vile scent. I could see it twirling in the air like a vile miasma. It clung and drifted to the untainted air, and illuminated my path as I cut through the chaff. It stuck to my nose and made my stomach churn as another bout of anger coursed through me, followed by the sting of betrayal. I'll make him pay. I'll make them all pay. It took a while, but eventually, I found the power source. I braced my arm and threw my fist through the wooden door. Behind it sat another open portion of the outer wall. All around me, there were dozens of enemy formations. Spears and swords glistened in the ambient moonlight, and the stars behind that twinkled sadly in the night sky. But the one that mattered the most stood in front of me. He wielded a scythe that was as ornate as they come. The edge bled tendrils of green and sizzled as they dripped onto the ground. His eyes were a lifeless void of green that seemed to flicker in the light, and his flesh constantly decayed and regrew in a sick cycle. The sound of teeth mashing together filled the air as the monster stared at me. My oh my. To think that the War Master has graced me with his presence. Viator, you foul traitor. I brandished my blade and took another step forward. Fire pulsed in my chest and burned with a radiant passion that threatened to overwhelm me. Traitor? No, Octavian. I released our people from the mortal coil that bound us. Each of us now is so much more than we could have ever dreamed of. Severed from that lying empress, we are free. He clanked the hilt of his scythe against the ground. The hollow sound resonated through the still air. Free? No, you are but a slave. All of you. Chained by false lies and empty promises. Tell me, Viator, what were you lacking in life? What were you not given? You had everything you could ever dream of, and you gave it up for what? A chance to live forever? I pity you. I pity all of you. My rage flickered through me, and I felt my bones stretch and my muscles grow. Viator was to blame for everyone's fate here. I did not hate the soldiers. They were under his spell. Perhaps when I cut him down, they will all be free. Free to embrace Her Majesty's light. He clicked his teeth together, and putrid green energy exploded from behind him. Come, Waraster. You can't imagine the beautiful bounty of death. Let me craft you a new body, one that is free from your false empress's grasp. Let me free you from your mortal coil. I crossed the distance between us in the blink of an eye and swung my sword towards his waist. The undead easily parried the first blow, and a sonic boom filled the room as sparks exploded into the air. I will never betray my oaths, and I will never betray my people. Our weapons crashed into each other, and gusts of air blew into us. Each movement from the traitor was smooth and flowed like liquid, and each riposte and parry from me was solid and unyielding. Viator danced around me, swinging his scythe around in graceful arcs. Putrid green energy splattered around us, melting through stone and wood with terrifying ease. I wish I could say that my muscles screamed, and that piercing pain from my flesh being ripped apart and then stitched apart bombarded my mind. But I couldn't. I couldn't feel anything, and that alone pushed me even further into a fury. The surrounding ground cracked and shattered as our blades crossed. Neither of us could get the upper hand here. He boosted past human limitations with his false god's power, and I was a shadow of myself. But I still pressed on. I would never give up. I couldn't. His face was locked in a twisted rictus of pleasure, and a condescending cackle filled the air as he danced his weapon around in a beautiful arc. War Master, how far you have fallen if you can't handle a man like me. More sparks flew into my face as I riposted another blow from his scythe. I gritted my teeth, took a step forward, pumped more ki through my body, and swung my blade even harder. I couldn't let my temper get the best of me here. There was no barking or braying that I could do to counter. It would only give him satisfaction. So instead, I pressed on silently, my body falling into its familiar patterns. Each time his scythe fell, my flesh was rent apart, only to quickly stitch itself back together. My mind struggled to keep itself together. Was I more than human? Was I less than? The thoughts swirled around my head as more power coursed through me. Red lighting arced through the air and slammed into walls and the ground, tearing gouges out of it. My muscles rippled, and I took another step forward, caught the man's scythe mid-swing, and used the pommel of my blade to smash his teeth. Why shouldn't I embrace my body more? I couldn't feel pain, so why was I acting like I could? Why couldn't I take a blow that would rip a normal man apart? But just as those thoughts crossed my mind, they disgusted me. Why was I shedding my humanity for an abomination? I lashed out with a kick that shattered bone, and in turn, I caught the scythe's blade through my abdomen. My body didn't even register it as I held the blade in place and punched it with everything I had, sending the dead man flying through the far wall. I was a monster myself, and I deserved to die. A sickening, suckling noise filled my ears as the scythe was torn from my stomach and flew toward Viator. Heh, it seems like you are starting to embrace who you are, Octavian. Come join us and shed your chains and reach even greater heights. You've already started the journey. Let me help you finish it. His broken body quickly healed as he stood up and dusted off the wood shavings covering his body. I am the War Master of Asteria. I am the Astrian demon and guardian of her lands. Above that, I am proud to serve my empress. I am the servant of her people, and I reject you, Viator, and all that you have done. There can be no forgiveness. Your recompense will be your death. With each word that I spoke, I felt a righteous anger fill my being, and the last vestiges of power crept into my body. It was time to end this once and for all. Calixa POV. The town was beautiful, but in what felt like an antiquated way. It was like I was attending a Renaissance festival, but with a heavy touch of fantasy elements. In fact, there were a few elves standing near a tavern-like building that looked like they were straight out of a Tolkien novel, which was impressive in its own right. But I had to restrain myself from gawking at everything. But I circled back to what he said earlier about the war golems. The way he said it reminded me of machines of some sort, not to mention the name Assyrian. If my memory serves me correctly, that was an old Mesopotamian empire. Normally, I wouldn't have jumped to any of those conclusions, but when he brought up the summoning, that was when everything fell into place. A part of me hoped that there were other people from Earth here, but the other part of me didn't want that. I didn't want to interfere with them, nor did I want them to bother me. I was content to stay locked away in my corner of the world. Oh, Mother, can we go to that store there? Nyx piped up again and squeezed my hand as she pointed toward a wooden building on the left. A few people, who were clearly adventurers, were sitting outside talking among themselves. My eyes traveled up toward the sign that hung over the top. Inscribed in the aged, weathered wood was a turquoise flame. In a heartbeat, I knew what she was pointing at. Not right now, but we will be here for a day or so. But eventually, we can visit. My dear daughter was obsessed with magic. However, I didn't mind indulging her in it, so I created a metric ton of coins to ensure that I had enough money to spend. Okay, Mother. She thankfully dropped the subject as we trudged forwards. Redrick grew quiet as we all walked together, and I could feel dozens of eyes resting on us. I knew that coming here would gather attention, and honestly, it made me feel a little uncomfortable, but I would bear it for now. I had my Palatines and Alessia nearby, so I'm confident I could handle anything if it came my way. I ignored all the gazes that were coming our way and followed Redrick further into town. All around me, wooden buildings were reaching upwards, and the ambient hum of conversation reached my ears, bringing me a sense of comfort that made me miss restaurants. The hum of dozens of conversations happening at once was just reassuring in a way that was hard to describe. This is the town square. From here, you can find every major district, as well as houses of import. Mine is the building right here. He pointed towards a house that sat happily in the middle of being oversized and undersized. It radiated a sense of nobility with the gate that sat in the front and had pillars connected to a small breezeway. But in front of the house stood two soldiers who wore cloaks over their armor. From the depths of the darkness that shrouded their faces came eyes that seemed to peer into my soul. These are the king's royal guards. They are here for security, and with them around, plus your guards, you shouldn't have any issues being here. He gestured towards the one closest to us, and it nodded and opened the gate for us. The other stared at us as we walked past, and I felt naked under its gaze. But I pushed further ahead and walked past them with no further trouble. Together, we walked down the small trail that led to the door of the house. Plants lined the sprawling pathway, and I could see tulips, daisies, and my favorite, which were the red roses that looked like they were in mid-blossom. I think I will try to make a garden in my domain someday. Sitting there in the middle, eating food and watching the flowers bloom would be nice. The thought passed through fleetingly as we approached the door. In front of it stood an elderly gentleman who seemed to be well past his prime. He looked like a traditional butler, and he even had a set of glasses on his face that reminded me of old-timey monocles. "Welcome back." His white glove-clad hand crossed over his chest and bowed slightly towards us. "Everyone, this is Gerald, my head butler. He will attend to all your needs, so please do not hesitate to ask him for anything." Redrick gestured towards the butler, who nodded and straightened himself out. "Hello. My name is Calixa Asteria. I am the Empress of Asteria. This is my daughter, Nyx, and my chosen Alessia." I quickly pointed them out as I spoke. Nyx replied with a slight wave, and Alessia merely nodded in response. "What are the six who are with you?" Gerald glanced around, and instantly I felt the hairs rise on the back of my head. He could see them? However, before I could reply, Alesia spoke up. "Those are our personal guards. They will not require any attendance nor substance." Her response was curt and to the point, but within, I could detect a sense of fear. She clearly didn't expect them to be spotted so easily, either. "I understand. Please, come inside. Allow me to show you around the grounds." The elderly man pushed open the front door and gestured for us to enter. Redrick took the lead. "If you would excuse me, I will head to my office. Once Gerald finishes showing you around the house, he will take you to me." He curtly nodded and scampered off, looking a little overwhelmed with everything. Not that it bothered me in the slightest. I was the one who put this on him, so he could take all the time he needed for his preparations. The moment I crossed the threshold of the building, cool air assaulted me in soft waves, reminding me of an air conditioner. A furtive glance around didn't reveal any air vent, so I was at a loss. But I also didn't want to look dumb by asking where it came from. We stood in the foyer, and next to us was a small enclave of shelves with what looked to be slippers of some sort. "This is the foyer. We ask that shoes be removed upon entering here for cleanliness reasons." He reached out and quickly presented us with slippers. I stifled a surprised cough. I didn't have a thing against it, but this struck me as something that I'd seen before. I just couldn't remember where. "Mother, do I need to take off my shoes?" Nyx glanced up at me, and I nodded my head. "Yes. You need to respect their rules when you are in someone else's home." She grumbled out her displeasure as she reached down and started to untie her boots, and I spared a glance towards Alessia. "Are you doing all right? You have been quiet this entire time." "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just keeping an eye out. Being out here just makes me feel uneasy," she replied as her golden eyes came to rest on me, and I felt my heart flutter in my chest. She looked so hot in her dress suit. I couldn't imagine her in a dress, so it was a good thing that I talked her into wearing this for formal occasions. "I'm sorry. We will only be here a few days." I yearned to reach out to reassure her, but in public, I had to keep the public displays of affection down. I needed to keep my image up, even though it ate at me to be unable to do the things I wanted. "I know, Empress. I'll be okay, though." She flashed me a warm smile, and I nodded my head and quickly bent over to undo my boots. Once I was done, I slid my feet into the slippers and glanced up toward Gerald. He glanced at us and nodded his head. "Good, come along. I will introduce you to the head maid and the rooms you will be staying in." He spun and stepped up onto the small ledge that led further into the house. I took Nix's hand and followed him into a large lobby. A dual staircase sat on opposite sides of us and was lined with various pictures depicting people I had no names for. Hanging from the ceiling was a chandelier with 6 silver orbs hanging, casting a warm light that met the wooden walls. This is the main lobby. The staircase to the left leads to the administrative wing, and the staircase to the right leads to the guest suites. Please, come along. Gerald didn't miss a beat as he damn near glided away. I pulled my daughter along with me as I ascended the staircase behind him and took in the various artworks. Looking at it all made me feel like I was in a natural history museum looking at some long-dead nobles' art collection. It was beautiful, though. When we finished our journey, we stood in a small hallway that looked pretty much the same as the rest of the house. Paintings lined the length of the walls, and near the furthest door down was a woman who wore a maid's outfit. She had shoulder-length blonde hair and looked to be no older than 23. She was a cute little thing if anything. This is the head maid, Miranda. Please, do not hesitate to reach out to her for any of your needs if I am not around. He gestured towards Miranda, who gave us a small bow. Hello, and welcome to our estate. The formalities bugged me, but they were a necessary evil. This was a life that I chose for myself in the end, at any rate. Thank you for having us, I replied with a curt nod and strode further down the hallway. Miranda stepped to the side and opened the door, revealing a decently sized room with 2 beds made perfectly with snow-white sheets. Mother, these beds are so big. Nix let go of my hand and rushed into the bedroom, giggling as she threw herself onto one of the beds and started to roll around. This was going to be a long trip. I could already feel it in my bones. Alessia stepped into the room behind me and nodded toward Miranda, who reached in and closed the door behind us, giving us a fleeting moment of privacy. I reached into my cloak, quickly undid the buttons, shifted it to the side, and pulled out my sports bag that had stuffed all of our necessities. I placed it on the bed, undid the top, reached its depths, and pulled out Nix's backpack. Here you go, I told her as I placed it on the bed for her to forage through. But once you finish with it, give it back to me so I can store it again. I didn't trust leaving anything of ours out. Thankfully, it wasn't Redrick that I was worried about, but any of these adventurers that could want to strike it rich may try to make a play. It was better to be safe than sorry. Okay, Mother. She reached into her bag and started rummaging through it for whatever she needed. Now that my daughter was occupied, I turned my attention toward Alessia. Alessia, are you sure you are okay? Yes, Empress. I promise. She crossed her arms and nodded, but I knew her better than that. I sighed, walked over to her, slowly wrapped my arms around her, and pulled her into a hug. In front of Nix, I didn't care anymore. She already knew what we were, so there wasn't a point in hiding. You know you can tell me if anything is bothering you, right? I know, Empress. I'm just stressed by the security detail, but I can handle it. She laced her arms around me and pulled me into her, and I settled in her embrace. I'm sorry for stressing you out then. Venturing out here was my idea in the end. It would be my fault, wouldn't it? It's not a bother. It was something that would make you happy, so I'm content with making the proper arrangements for you. She pulled away and pressed her lips gently against my forehead, and I wanted to melt into her arms at that sweet gesture. You are the best, Alessia. My words almost came out as a purr as I nestled into her for a few seconds longer before I pulled away. Only for you, Empress. A wide grin threatened to split her lips. My heart flipped slightly in my chest as I stepped away and wandered back towards the bed and towards Nix, who was staring up at us with an inquisitive gaze. Mother, if Alessia is your mate, does that make her my other parent as well? My brain came to a halt at her question, and I stuttered for a moment. What she was asking was a question I wasn't ready for, though I knew it was coming one day or another. If that is what you want it to be, then I'm sure Alessia wouldn't mind. I glanced toward her as I spoke and tried to clamp down on the fear that was rising in my chest. What if things went wrong? I don't mind at all. At her words, Nix squealed, rushed over to Alessia, and threw her arms around her waist. Granted, she was still a little on the short side. I love you, Ms. Alessia. A wide-fanged grin split her face as she rubbed her face into her stomach like a cat. Alessia's face twisted strangely as she reached out and rested her hand on Nix's head. I held back the tears that threatened to spill from my face at the happiness that was coming to life. But I held it back as I turned away. Now wasn't the time to have an emotional breakdown, even if it was a good one. I'm going to go ahead and meet with Redrick. You two are welcome to stay here and relax with each other for now. Giving those two a little space would do wonders and let them get a little closer. Are you sure, Empress? Alessia asked as Nyx was busy smothering her with love and affection. Good. Now Alessia has to deal with it. Yes. Take some time with Nyx for now. We should be perfectly safe here. I reached out and stuffed some clothes Nyx had spread around the room back into the bag. If you say so, she murmured and had a strange look etched on her face. If anything, I'm pretty sure she was a little uncomfortable and trying to find a way out of dealing with Nyx. But joke's on her. Nyx is her problem now. I'll be back hopefully soon. Be a darling and keep an eye on our stuff. Okay. I winked at her through my mask and wandered over to the door. It was time to get the first meeting underway. A few moments later, I stood outside of an ornate door. The wooded golden leaves etched into vine-like shapes that spread like a miniature tree across its surface. Miranda was to my right, and her face had a faint blush. But I wasn't sure why. She reached out to the door and gave it a gentle rap. Redrick, the Empress of Asteria, is here to see you. Her voice rang like gentle chimes as she spoke. You may enter, he replied. She nodded her head and gently pressed the door open. Behind it was a small room, with the wooden walls stained a reddish-brown color that glowed softly in the afternoon light that pushed through the far window. Redrick sat at a desk with stacks of paperwork akin to mountains as they reached up toward the ceiling. His eyes were ringed by dark circles, and stress was clearly eating away at him. Empress. He nodded and gestured for me to take a seat across from him. Please, call me Calixa, in private. When Alessia wasn't here, we could afford to be a tad bit more lenient. Besides, I knew he was only doing it because he was scared of her, and I didn't blame him in the slightest. He stiffened slightly before he nodded. Thank you. That's a breath of fresh air. Some of the stress that was pressing on him melted off slightly. Anyway, what can I do for you today, Calixa? I sat in the velvet chair across from him and cleared my throat. There's a couple of things I wanted to speak to you about. The first is our economic relationship. This was one of the most crucial parts of this trip. The less essence that I had to spend, the better. Once I get a steady flow back in, I could worry about upgrading the domain and focusing on making my domain great. Is everything to your liking? The question came out tentatively, almost like he was afraid he would lose our business. Yes, of course. I greatly appreciate the trade. However, if you are interested, I come up with more propositions. Now, this was going to be the most troublesome part. How would I convince him to start a company with me? You have my interest? What do you have in mind? He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Well, I would like to start a company with you to manage assets and rake in capital for our use. Instead of dancing around the topic, I decided to go straight in. It was the best thing to do in the end. I'm afraid that I'm not familiar with that term. Explain it to me. The mention of money piqued his interest, and I was hoping to keep playing on that desire. Well, it would be akin more to what you would call a guild, though in a loose sense. We would pool our cash and start taking over various key resource points. For example, we can buy out a guild that focuses on lumber or stone production and then use the combination to create buildings for cheaper. It's a rough example, but it should get the idea across. It was a rough example, but it was difficult to put it into words. So what you were recommending is something like a horizontal expansion. It's something that can work. Would you perhaps give me some time to think it over? His eyes were alight with desire as my words clearly influenced him. I wasn't the best at describing what I had in mind, but he seemed to latch on pretty quickly. Of course, take all the time that you need. The next order of business would be the establishment of a train station in your town. This was by far one of the most important things I needed to discuss with him. If I talked him into allowing such a huge project to go through, then the number of resources and essence I bring into the domain would grow exponentially, not to mention the number of adventures that can make it into my domain. Train station? His face twisted slightly as the words left his lips. This was going to be a bombshell, and I didn't think he would be ready for it. As the words left my lips, his eyes widened slightly. But I haven't seen such a device before. Nor has anyone who has delved into your domain. I know. We only recently got back into development. We should have a working model here in the next few weeks if you want to see it. However, it is a technology we will not be actively selling if that's what you think. At most, we will only place a station here and potentially other vital areas. Maybe more if you agree to form a company with me. I dropped that last part on him, hoping that's all I needed to convince him of what I wanted. Money wasn't my end goal, after all. Just the essence. But if I made money, so be it. I wouldn't complain in the slightest. You know, you come in here, giving me news that I could hardly believe. Tell me, Calixa, what is your endgame, truly? He leaned back in his chair and eyed me wearily, waiting for my response. In the end, all that matters to me is my people. Our relationship allows me to give them a better life. Even if it sounds altruistic, that is the truth. Did it sound cliché? A bit, yes, but that is my goal. That is my driving purpose. The undead deserves to be happy, and I will do everything I can to grant that to them. It's rare to find a ruler who cares truly for the people. Even if they do, the nobles don't usually either. He nodded and stared at me with a blend of a grimace and a smile. I will take your word for it, Calixa. However, before we pursue that topic any further, I would like to see this train before I sign off on such a partnership. That is perfectly valid. If you give me some time, I will have the infrastructure and prototype finished, and I'll happily send you an invitation to test it out. I released the breath that I was holding. Good. All I needed to do was prove my claimed strength. That wouldn't be hard, since I had complete faith in my undead. Good. Anyway, I have a small proposition for you as well. We have had a few undead outbreaks as of late. If you would like if we could capture them, would you like to take them? The second he said that, I felt a strange feeling in my chest. I wanted to do nothing more than protect all the undead that I could. But I had to force myself not to accept it immediately. I didn't want to appear desperate. Well, that would depend. Would I just be a prison dump? I don't mind if they shipped off all the undead they came across to me. Mob creation ate much of my essence, and I wouldn't even bat an eye if I could get them for free, especially if they were high tier. The only issue would be that they wouldn't be loyal to me. But that would be easily solved by not giving them positions of power but simply letting them exist. Not exactly. I wasn't considering using you as such. It was merely a gesture of goodwill. Since you supposedly cut the chains that bind the undead to necromancers, I was hoping to give the undead a new life with you. He leaned forward in his chair and regarded me with an impassive stare. He was undoubtedly trying to scrutinize me and my responses, but I would give him as little to work with as I could. I will happily take you on that. Send any and all undead that you capture to my domain. I shifted forward in my chair and reached my hand out to shake him to solidify our agreement. There will be no strings attached. Just set them free the moment you pass into the domain. He glanced at my black metal-clad hand for a second before reaching out. So it's a deal then. I'm glad. Now that the first part of our negotiations is out of the way, I think I'll take Nyx out into the town for a bit. If that's all right. I pulled my hand away and settled back into the chair. I needed a break from all of this, anyway. Besides, if I didn't take her out to the magic store we passed on the way here, she would never let me hear the end of it. Oh, that's perfectly fine. I need to think some things over. Also, before you go, would you mind meeting with Kato and a few representatives of the Adventurer Guild while you are here? Gross. I hated dealing with people. Especially people I didn't know. But it was part of the job, so I guess I could handle it now. That's all right. When? How does tomorrow sound? Fuck, that was such a short time. I wanted to groan at the thought. Yeah, that works. Just send me a summon when you are ready. I cleared my throat and stood up, hopefully showing that this was the end of the conversation. Of course. Enjoy your time out in town, Calixa. He gave me a curt nod, and I spun on my heel as I walked towards the door. How did Alessia deal with my daughter, I wonder? When I returned to the guest room, I gently pushed the door open and saw Alessia lying on the bed with Nyx passed out, lying on top of her. So, I'm assuming things went well then? I asked as I stepped into the room and shut the door behind me as quietly as possible. Yes. She seems happy with it, so I won't complain. Her golden eyes twinkled with happiness as she ran her fingers through Nyx's hair. The girl is happy with anything that has to do with us. I crossed the room and walked over to Alessia and sat on the edge of the bed. And honestly, so am I. Alessia's eyes darted up toward me as I reached out and took my hand in hers. Calixa. She stared up at me and she trailed off. I grinned, slid into the bed next to both of them, and wrapped my arms around them. Yes, darling. I asked as I nestled myself into Alessia while wrapping my free arm around Nyx. You should take that mask off so I can kiss you. She whispered softly in my ear. My heart jumped slightly, and I felt a grin cross my face. In a little while. Let's just enjoy this moment for a second, shall we? She nodded her head and, instead, lay there and stared at me. Would you mind if we went to the magical store later? I asked as I ran my thumb over her hand. No, Nyx already asked to go. She said she wanted it to just be you and her for now. As she said that, I felt like I could see sadness lingering in the depths of her eyes. I wouldn't take it personally. She truly looks up to you. I rested my forehead against hers and smiled softly. Besides, you are a mother now. I know. I'm just at a loss for how to deal with this. My entire life has revolved around fighting to get ahead. I've fought monsters and delved into dungeons. I've trained troops and fought in battles. Yet, I don't know how to do this. She glanced away from me, and her eyes fell on the form of my sleeping daughter. Honestly, I don't know either. A lot of it is just instinct. But I wouldn't worry. We can figure this out together. All right? Mostly, I really didn't know what I was doing in raising Nyx. I never planned on having a child, and everything to me was unexplored territory. Her eyes traveled back to mine and met. I happily stared at her eyes, lost in the golden sea that shifted in tandem with my heart. We both laid like that for quite some time until I heard Nyx start to stir. "Mother?" she asked as she peeked an eye open and stared at me. Yes. I had to force myself to pull my eyes away from Alessia to glance at her. "Can we go shopping now?" she asked through mostly closed eyes as she nestled herself further into Alessia. "And if I tell you no?" I curled myself up a little tighter and placed my head close to Alessia's chest to be closer to Nyx. "Then I'm going to go back to sleep." Her words held a sense of finality as she replied, though I knew she wasn't sleeping. "It just sounds like you want Alessia all to yourself." I shifted my arms slightly as I could reach and ran my fingers through her hair. "She is very comfortable." Nyx nodded her head slightly. "Well, I'm glad. Now get up and get ready so we can go," I told her as I poked her face. In half a heartbeat, she was already up and rummaging through her bag for a change of clothes. I smiled while I watched her get ready and shifted back to my position to Alessia. "You know." I trailed off slightly as I positioned my face close to her ears. "I know what," she replied in an ever-so-quiet whisper as I got comfortable once again. This time, I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her close to me. "Nyx said you were comfortable," I told her as I glanced at Nyx. I didn't know how good her sense of hearing was, so I wanted to make what I wanted to say as discreet as possible. "I know." She shifted under my touch slightly as I leaned in as close I could, and in a very hushed whisper, I continued on. "I would be inclined to agree, though I would have to get you underneath me to see for sure." I rested there for a split second before I pulled away. Perhaps I should stop teasing the poor girl, but I couldn't help it. Though I have an aching feeling if I keep it up, Alessia will take her pound of flesh. At least, that's what the look in her eyes was telling me. "Come on, mother." Nyx laughed happily as she grabbed my hand and pulled me down the street. Dozens of adventurers were milling about in the morning sun, and some spared us quick glances. Others stared at us from the shadows like hunters waiting for their chance to strike. As if I would ever allow something like that to happen. If any of them touch her, I'd kill them. I passively activated a few of my aura abilities to scare some of the worst ones off, and thankfully, they backed down. Nyx seemed oblivious to it all, which was good. For all her bravado, I knew it would get to her. But I was here to protect her, mostly since she begged me to take her out. Sadly, she just wanted it to be me and her, so Alessia has to cling to the shadows. Though I would have loved for it to be the three of us. Nyx was in a mad dash for the magical shop that we passed by earlier. The child was dead set on whatever goal she had in mind, and I was helpless to deter her. I held her back slightly as she rushed forward, and I kept my eyes on everyone around us. I couldn't let her get too far ahead of herself now. In what felt like mere seconds, we reached the front door of the magical store. Without hesitation, Nyx pushed the door inwards, revealing a large room filled to the brim with various objects. In a way, it was like I was staring at a recreation of Hogwarts. Azure flames sat above scones that were attached to pillars, casting a baleful blue light into the air. The faint hum of magical energy touched my ears and brought with it a faint headache. My body hated magic, and I didn't know why. I did nothing for magic to hate me, yet it still does. Nyx, on the other hand, was staring at everything in wonder. Her eyes were as wide as plates, and the largest grin I've ever seen split her face from ear to ear. "Mother, it's perfect here. Can we have a place like this back at home?" I thought it over for a moment before I nodded my head in response. After all, there was no real reason that we couldn't have a place like this. Maybe one day, once I have the resources, I would construct a magical academy. Not just for my daughter, but for the undead that live in my domain. It would be a large building that would put even the largest castle to shame. Yes, that would be lovely indeed. Nyx giggled in response and rushed ahead. Her first stop was towards a bunch of strange goblets that were centered on the table. The first one was gold, and it was studded with brilliant rubies that twinkled like young stars. The second was a silver goblet that was as scratched to hell, and could barely reflect any light that graced its surface. Then the third was the color of polished bronze, and a faint golden fire radiated from its depths and licked the air. "Mother, what are these?" Nyx peeked over at the table, but I held her hands away from the cups. I didn't want her to just up and grab magical items out of the blue, as that is a recipe for disaster. Cups, but don't touch them. Let's see if we can find a shopkeeper to help us out, okay? I asked as I steered her away from the table filled with magical goblets. Okay, Mother. She allowed me to guide her down the aisle and past all the mini objects. We turned the corner and saw a small countertop, with a bell sitting on the ledge and a few quills lying across its surface. I reached out and pressed the bell. It rang gently in the air, and a few seconds later, a gruff voice broke through the still air. One moment, ladies. A gruff voice came from the back, and the accent seemed familiar. I could detect a faint touch of Irish, but there was something else there. It sounded close to Irish, but I couldn't place it off the top of my head. A few heartbeats later, a head covered in scraggly brown hair popped up from behind the desk. Hello and welcome to Nestral's Arcane Emporium. As my eyes focused on him, I picked out more and more details. His eyes were like small gray storms that flickered in the arcane light. A large beard braided with silver ribbons broke into 3 separate pieces rested on top of a large bush of facial hair. In a moment, I instantly knew what I was looking at. This was a dwarf. Hello, my name is Calixa, and this is my daughter Nyx. We stopped in to look at your wares. Hello. Nyx spoke up and waved at the man, who glanced between us. A few indistinguishable emotions danced across his face as he did so, before it faded, and a more professional demeanor took over. Welcome. I see your daughter is a budding young mage. Tell me, young miss, what are you looking at for? The dwarf pushed himself away from the desk and ambled around it. A thoughtful hum left her lips, yet her eyes flared like a predator who was close to jumping its prey. What books do you have? Are you looking for grimoires? Spell books? What are your affinities? Nestral asked as he ruffled his azure mage's cloak for a second and motioned for us to follow him. I'll take whatever you have. Oh. Also, do you have alchemy supplies? She bounded slightly ahead and grilled the dwarf with various questions involving magic. I hung slightly back and watched the two talk amongst each other. It's good that she has a passion to keep her focused. The best I could do now was just keep pushing her forward. The two wandered over to a large bookshelf filled to the brim with hundreds of books. Some looked like they were plain, while others seemed to radiate sickening auras of color. This really was a beautiful place, but esoterically. It made me wonder how much different Earth would have been if magic existed there, instead of just in movies or books. I crossed my arms and sauntered down the aisle we were in and looked at some books out of curiosity. There was a book for everything, really. Magical theory, magical history, rituals, affinities, and much, much more. Perhaps I should buy everything that I can and move it to the domain and give it to Karen. He was the minister of magic, so I'm sure he would enjoy having it all. Mother, look. My daughter's voice tore me from my thoughts, and I glanced down at her. She was proudly holding up a large brown-covered book that had a single teal-colored rune in the middle. It's an arcane grimoire. Can I get it? Her eyes glimmered hopefully at me as she clenched the book. Of course, get whatever you want, love. I smiled back at her, and she damn near keeled over in sheer happiness. Thanks, Mother. You're the best. Once again, she vanished to pester the dwarf shopkeep. I turned my attention back to the shelves and kept walking down them. Let's see what I could get for Karen and the domain while I'm here. Well, for starters, the question would be, what magic is my domain lacking? Out of habit, I tried to access my menu, but nothing was responsive. Shit, that's right. I guess I have to operate off of memory then. I knew for sure that we have dark, lunar, fire, water, earth, and air. But my overall knowledge of magic was rather lacking. Excuse me. I have a question. I walked over to the dwarf, who was busy opening up a spell book, and was explaining to my daughter the use of runes in a spell. Yes, lassie. The dwarf glanced up at me and ruffled his beard slightly. Do you have anything on affinity cultivation, or anything of the sort? We have a collection of grimoires for most basic affinities, as well as complex ones. What would you like? He handed the book over to Nyx, who happily added it to the pile of books in her hands. Honestly, I'll take whatever you have. I wasn't sure what a complex affinity was, and it sort of piqued my interest. I just didn't want to ask questions that would make me look stupid. Nyx, if you like, you are more than welcome to place those books down on the countertop over yonder. He told her as he motioned for me to follow him. I'll be okay. She replied with a curt nod as she clenched her stack of books like a dragon hoarding its treasure. I followed him through the store to another set of bookshelves. This time, it was a quarter the size of the others, and only a large handful of books existed here. Here you go. I try to keep a copy of grimoires for every affinity that I can get my hands on. I have most of the basics, as well as a few complex ones. Sadly, I can't get my hands on any of that higher-tiered stuff. If you have any more questions, let me know. Thank you, I replied as I looked through the books. Naturally, I crossed off the affinities that I knew we already had and looked for others, and thankfully the bookshelf was broken into magical sections. The first one that I was looking at was elemental. I reached out and ran my fingers across the cover of the books, reading over each of the names. The selection was small. It was near abysmal once I crossed off the affinities that I already had. Let's see here. I would happily take the light magic off of the dwarf's hand as a basic affinity in lightning. Then I'll match it with storm magic and ash magic. Sadly, however, that was all that was offered, but that was all right. Anything is better than nothing, and I will put all of this to excellent use in the domain. Now let's see what magical artifacts I could get my hands on for everyone else. I dropped a large stack of books onto the counter, only adding to the pile that was steadily growing. So far I collected books on theorems, affinities, healing magic, thaumaturgy, talismans, and rituals. As for magical artifacts, I found a bunch that I could use as traps, like poison goblets, cursed chests, and the likes. Nyx, on the other hand, had collected books about the use of wands, more affinities, rituals, and a few other branches of magic. That doesn't also include all the artifacts that she ended up finding that she wanted. Though, I didn't know what she was going to use them for. I swear that child is such a geek for magic. But it makes her happy. So who am I to judge? I pulled my gaze away from her and brought it back to the countertop and towards the dwarf who was busy cataloging everything. That's a fair bit of product you lassies have. Anything special going on? He asked as he grabbed another book off the sky-high stack. No, I just love magic. Nyx replied as she had the stack of books like someone was about to make a move to steal them all from her. I understand that. My ma and paps told me I wasn't a proper dwarf for liking magic. But I'm glad to see that Yama respects that. The dwarf nodded his head as he wrote the cover of the book that was in his hand. Nyx hummed her approval at his words. Yes, Mother is the greatest. She lets me learn all kinds of magic. I bit back a grin at her words. She was so single-minded sometimes, especially in pursuing what she wanted. A little lassie that she is. The dwarf nodded his head as he jotted down another book into his accounting log, and I turned away and glanced around once more. Magic was something, huh? How I wished I could use magic. I found my gaze traveling to my hands, and I gazed at them. Was it worth trading magic for what I have now? Small twinges of regret floated around my mind that I pushed away. It wasn't time to get lost in my own choices now. How would you like these delivered? The dwarf's words brought me back to reality, and I glanced at him. I can take most of them. What is the cost? I asked as I unslung my sports bag and placed it on the countertop. Grand total comes up to 15 gold coins, 56 silver coins, and 15 copper coins. The dwarf set the last book down onto the stack and glanced up at me, apprehensively, fully expecting me not to cover the cost. I reached into my bag and grabbed the coin purse I made, and rifled through it, and pulled out 16 gold coins. I didn't know how prices worked in this world, so I just made a metric fuck ton of coins to make sure that I had enough to cover everything that I needed. Maybe a little too much, but I didn't care. It's not like it was hurting anything. The dwarf gazed at me with wide eyes, and as he glanced between me and the coin purse. Is there anything else that I can get for you? No, that's all. You can keep the change, by the way. I told him as I slid the stack of gold coins over to him and collected the books. I knew I couldn't carry most of them in my bag, but I had a feeling that Nyx would want all of her stuff. Not that I cared. It would keep her out of trouble for most of the trip, or for however long it would take for her to pour everything over. I divided everything in a rough semblance of what I guessed was hers, and what was mine. Hey, this may sound like a strange request, but would you mind taking this stack of stuff over to the domain? I asked as I gathered all of Nyx's things and placed them to the side. Save all her artifacts. Those could be shipped back home. That is odd. But you paid good money, so I don't mind. The dwarf shrugged and hopped off his large bar stool. I reached into my bag and pulled out a pen. Would you mind if I got a piece of paper from you? I needed to write instructions for the undead that would pick this stuff up to take to Karen. Everything would go to him, save Nyx's stuff, of course. One moment. He wandered into the back while I stood there with my pen in hand. Mother, can I have my artifacts too? Nyx gazed up at me with hope-filled eyes. No, I'm going to ship them back home, so nothing happens to them. However, I'll keep all your books on hand so you can read them as you like. I leaned against the counter and shot her a glance. Yes, that is very smart. I don't want anyone to touch my hoard. She nodded her head matter-of-factly. I rolled my eyes at her words. I keep forgetting that she was a dragon, so a lot of the things that she does make sense. But there was only so much that I could iron out with her. The struggle of raising a dragon child, I guess. I pushed away from the countertop and stacked all of Nyx's books into my bag. Maybe I would find some peace for a few days. A few moments later, we finally made it back to Redrick's house. Nyx tried her hardest to get me to move faster since she wanted to read, but I held her back. She needed to learn patience above all else. It was a struggle, but now we are back, so I can let her run loose. I nodded towards the knights who stood by the gate, but they were as still as statues as they gazed at me. They felt strong, far stronger than anything I have encountered, so thankfully, they were allies. Empress. Alessia gave me a small bow, and my heart jumped in my chest slightly. Why did I always feel like a giddy schoolgirl when I saw her? Alessia. I replied to her and fought the urge to rush over to her and wrap my arms around her. Ms. Alessia. Nyx let go of my hand and rushed over to her, and threw her arms around her and nuzzled herself into her stomach. Mother bought all kinds of books on magic. She even let me get artifacts. She pulled away and took Alessia's hand. But she's being mean and taking her time getting home. I really want to read. Oh, is that so? Do you want me to have a word with her, then? Alessia gazed down at Nyx with such a serious face that I had to force myself to not laugh. Please, I insist. Nyx pouted as she turned away from Alessia and glanced at me. Alessia chuckled and glanced at me. Empress, the child demands that I speak to you about her books. Well, if the child keeps trying to make demands of me, I won't give her the books at all. I shot Nyx a glance that hopefully conveyed that I was partially teasing, but also being serious. Her face paled considerably as my words reached her. You wouldn't dare. She stammered, shocked that I would do such a thing. Wouldn't I? I asked as I reached my hand out for her to take. I would, if I needed to, I would take them away from her, but for now, I wouldn't. For my sake of mind, at least. She stared at me, wide-eyed for a moment, trying to decide if I was kidding or not. A look of defeat crossed her face as she reached her hand up and out to me. I took hers and clenched it. Relax, I won't deprive you of your books, but don't think that you can demand anything of me. I'm sorry, Mother. Please don't take away my books. She glanced down at the ground and timidly kicked a stone. I won't. I squeezed her hand and pulled her towards the house. Now let's get back. I told her as I tugged her towards the direction of the house. I may spoil her rotten, but she is still my little girl. Okay. She perked up slightly as I guided her into the house. Now I did kind of want to visit the rest of the town, but that required me to figure out what to do with Nyx. With all of those books that I bought her, my job may be much easier to do now, but we shall see. Maybe I would even see if Alessia would want to go out on an actual date, or something of the sort. But before that at least, I would need to go shopping for other things that I would need for my domain, and talk to Redrick about hiring some people full-time to work in my domain. Nyx rushed into the bedroom, as fast as she could, and quickly disassembled one bed of all its pillows and blankets, only to drag them over to another. What are you doing? I asked. I stepped inside and let Alessia in before shutting the door behind us. Getting comfy. She replied as she fluffed a pillow and placed it against the headboard. Are you now? I asked her as I unslung my bag and placed it on my bed. Yep. I require myself to be as cozy as possible when I study. She grabbed a few more pillows and set them around her like a little ring, and grabbed the blanket and placed it on top. Can I have my books now? She asked as finished whatever it was she was doing. I sighed in defeat as I opened up my bag and began pulling out the books in small stacks. Nyx jumped from what now looked like a small nest and quickly grabbed the books and brought them back, and stacked them around the bed in an orderly manner. A few sat near the pillow at the top, and with the rest spread around her in a ring. Mother. She paused what she was doing for a moment and turned to face me. Yes. I sat down on my bed and glanced at her. I wonder what she wanted now. Thank you. For everything. It really means a lot to me. Her emerald eyes flickered in the light that pushed through the windows, and in that moment, I saw nothing but love in her eyes. Of course, Nyx. You are my world, after all. Warmth pulsed through my veins, and I wanted to cry from the sheer amount of happiness that I felt. I was so happy that it hurt. I love you, Mother. She told me as she grabbed the closest book to her and dived under the covers and wrapped herself up. I love you too. The words rolled from my lips, and I stared at her for a few extra seconds as she rolled around the bed and got cozy to read. My eyes lingered for a few heartbeats before I shifted my attention to the other most important person in my life. So, Alessia, Do you want to go out to the town with me? We still have some time to go out and do some sightseeing and some shopping. What about Nix? She asked as I gestured for her to come here. Nix is going to be absorbed in her books until she's done with them all. To prove my point, I turned back to my daughter, who was now fully under the blanket that was glowing softly from a light source within it. Nix, I called out to her. Would you mind if Alessia and I visited the town without you? She replied with a voice that seemed distant. See, what did I tell you? The girl is absorbed in her books. I doubt she will even realize we are gone. As Alessia neared me, I reached out like a needy child and wrapped my arms around her. What about protecting her? Are you sure you can trust everyone here? What if something happens? She peppered me with questions as she wrapped her arms around my neck. We can leave all the Palatines here. Not only that, there are the royal guards that live here, and the staff. Besides, I highly doubt that Redrick would allow any harm to come to her. I'm far too valuable an ally for him. But if it would make you feel better, I'll talk to him first. A part of me was hesitant to leave Nix here, but now that I know what she was capable of, I felt like I could trust her more. She would raise enough hell that we would be alerted. Just you and I? Calixa, that's dangerous. Alessia pushed me away slightly and tried to send me a stern look. Is it? I'm not worried when I have my knight in shining armor by my side. I gazed up at her. She really was my knight. She was my protector and my lover. Honestly, at this point, she really was just everything to me, and I trusted her with all my heart. I hate when you say things like that. Her body heaved slightly like she was releasing an apprehensive sigh. Why's that? I asked as I pulled her back into me. I was truly needy, and I don't think she realizes that just yet. Physical affection was what I needed, though I'm not sure why that's the case. What if we get attacked? I have to prioritize your safety at all costs. Again, her tone came as stern as she could make it, which granted, if I was anyone else, it would have probably scared me. Well, here's the thing, darling. I'm not going to run, and you are crazy if you think I'm going to let you get hurt. So if anything happens, you can count on the fact that I'm going to stand by your side and fight with you. Understand? I meant that with every fiber of my being. I'll be damned before I let anyone hurt her ever again. As far as I'm concerned, laying a finger on her is akin to laying a finger on me, and I won't tolerate it. You are insufferable. You know that. She asked as I felt her fingers run through my hair. Doing this with her, I now understand why Nix loves this so much. It really feels good, and I didn't want her to stop. I know, but you love me, so it's okay. I nestled into her embrace and closed my eyes once more, cherishing the feeling. That I do, Calixa. More than you know. Her words lingered in my mind for a moment, and a sense of panic lit in my chest. I didn't know what to do or say to that. Do I say anything to that at all? I mentally struggled for a bit as heat rushed to my cheeks, until I finally settled onto something. I know, it was cheesy, but that was really all I had at the moment. She left me completely frazzled all the time. The damn woman. I hate how much power she had over me. Instead of replying, Alessia swept back my hair, and I felt a pair of cool lips graze the flesh of my forehead. No matter how hard I tried to dominate her or push back, it was really me at the end of the day who was wrapped around her finger. She was so beautiful and driven and confident as hell. Yet she was also so kind and thoughtful. God, I was so hopelessly smitten, and I didn't know what to do. It also made me wonder what my parents would think. What would I say to them? Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. I'm back, and I'm a goddess. Oh, by the way, here is my spirit girlfriend and dragon daughter. The thought alone made me chuckle out loud. What is it? Alessia ran her fingers through my hair once more as she spoke. Nothing, my love. Just had a funny thought. I pulled away and gazed at her. Anyway, let's go into town. We should still have a few hours of daylight left, so we can go to a few stores. Maybe we can even find a restaurant. A part of me knew that this was for shopping and furthering my domain, but the other part of me knew that this was just an excuse for another date with her. Was it so wrong of me to want all of her time and attention? She stared at me, and I could feel all the apprehension in her stare, but she relented to me. Fine, Calixa, as you wish. Thank you so much, Alessia. I jumped up and wrapped my arms around her, causing her to chuckle as she gave me a pat on the back. Have I ever said that you and Nix are a lot alike? You have mentioned it a few times, but I haven't noticed it. I pulled away from her and took my spot back on the bed. A few people have mentioned that, but I don't really see the similarity. Well, trust me when I tell you that either Nix takes after you on a lot of things, or she has been rubbing off on you. Alessia stepped back a few steps and crossed her arms and rested against the wall. I like to think that she takes after me. But that may be my motherly side talking. I pulled my legs up to my chest and glanced over to Nyx, who was still busy underneath her blankets reading. Perhaps it is. I do like to think that you are a splendid mother. Alessia nodded her head slightly as her gaze traveled from me to my daughter. Do you think? It really was one of my greatest insecurities right now. I wanted to do right by Nyx in the end. She deserved a life that I didn't get. So I was always worried that I didn't do enough. I don't have to think. I know. Besides, if I didn't think so, you would be the first to hear about it. You may be my empress, but I can promise you I won't hold back if you deserve it. Her words were reassuring. I know Alessia wouldn't be afraid to say anything if I screwed up, so perhaps I should have a little more faith in myself. Nyx, Alessia and I are going out for a bit. All the Palatines are here, and I will instruct Redrick to ensure that all your needs are met. All right. I called out to her as I hopped off the bed and walked over to the door. Okay. Her response was still distant and distracted, and I couldn't help but feel like she was going to be angry if she took some time to stop reading. But that sounds like a Redrick problem. Hello. I totally forgot to post here that the new book out. Whoops, I am forgetful. With that being said, here's the link. The setting has been changed, characters updated, and whatnot. Do note that this novel isn't a lit or a dungeon core ATM. I've taken the kingdom building concept and expanded on it. However, worry not, this is still Whispers. With the same little Nyx, updated but still bratty, Alessia, also updated and cleaned up character. All the bosses will remain as they are, but, small spoiler, they will be known as heroes now. Magi tech that makes sense is a thing. No, this isn't super sci-fi stuff, but it will make sense when you see it. This story will be a super slow burn, just like Whispers was, so one step at a time. I will keep updating this novel sporadically as long as I remember. As many ideas for the new story were taken from the later backlog of this one. Enjoy and let me know, and I'll have a chapter posted here Sunday of Monday.